It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Give me a microphone on stage, I'll display it. Playing me right, and you'll get played out. Like polka dots, and people will shout. Dirty words, because you're a nerd. I'm first, you're third. It's absurd to think that you heard better rhymes than these.
Oh, I've heard them. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. Woo! Yeehaw! My name is William Bibiani. I am a film critic for the internet. I write for The Wrap and IGN and criticallyacclaimed.net, and everybody calls me Bibbs.
Ditto here, only my name is pronounced Whitney Seibold, and I don't write for The Wrap. I did once, but that's it.
No, that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
When I was a young man.
I feel like I've never been a young man.
Well,
I've always been an old man.
Yeah, well, your taste in movies bears that out.
Oh, this is true. My name is Whitney Seibold. I'm the old man. I'm the stick in the mud. And it's not a result of my age. I've always been this way.
Yeah.
I was a stick in the mud when I was 17.
You're an old soul.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or I'm just a snotty douche. Either way.
So you're the perfect person to help me talk about two films that, for better and worse, epitomized cool in their particular time periods.
Because if there's anything you know about film critics, it's that we're really, really cool.
That's right. And this week on Critically Acclaimed, in addition to reviewing the new movies Jurassic World: The Fallen Kingdom, Damsel, The Catcher Was a Spy, and Brain on Fire, we're going to be reviewing the Vanilla Ice star vehicle Cool as Ice.
Which is pretty cool.
It's
as ice, indeed.
Sure. And we're also going to be pairing it with a film that epitomized cool in the 1950s. But before we get into any of that, I want to talk to you a little bit about a thing called the Movie Trivia Schmoedown. Now, for those who don't know,
this is why you're all here, really.
It kind of is. The Movie Trivia Schmoedown is an online game show that Whitney and I participate in.
They're listening via the Schmo Snow Network, so they probably know about the Movie Trivia Schmoedown.
I'm just throwing it out there in case you're listening with a friend who's like, huh?
Okay.
I haven't joined this cult. It's all a lot of the film personalities from online and elsewhere, and we get together and we talk smack and we play movie trivia. And this last Friday, Whitney and I had a match against MODOK, a team which consists of Matt Atchity and Gray Drake. Matt Atchity from What the Flick, Gray Drake from Rotten Tomatoes. They're two of the nicest people we've ever met in the industry, and we destroyed them.
We didn't destroy them, but we did quite well.
We did okay. No, we had a good match, and we are currently sitting very pretty at 3 wins and 3 knockouts, with 1 loss, but that was close.
It was very close.
Yeah,
It ended up coming down to the very last question on that one.
That's just a flat loss. But every other win we've ever done has been insane. And I'm going to throw it out there. I think it's time we got a little bit more recognition for that.
I don't mind recognition. I was having a conversation with a fellow critic, and they said that they wanted wealth more than they wanted fame because, you look at some people become famous and they kind of lose their minds a little bit.
Sure.
They get really inflated. Not pointing a finger at anybody, just sort of a general observation.
You can think of a few celebrities off the top of your head, I'm sure.
I'm sure you could fill in your own blanks, but I said, wealth, of course. I would love wealth.
Who wouldn't?
Wouldn't that be great?
Neat.
Just to not ever have to worry about bills ever?
That's the
level of wealth I want.
Well, that's
just
the only
not to
level
worry
of wealth
about
that
bills.
matters.
Yeah, I don't need to collect luxury cars or any of that.
I read a study about this once, which was, people say that, like, oh, money can't buy you happiness. And the study was just like, actually, yeah. Money, having money is directly proportional to your happiness until the point where you no longer have to worry about your bills. You don't have to worry about your mortgage. You don't have to worry about your student loans. It's just your basic needs are taken care of. After that, there's no correlation. And if you have that much money, you're set.
After that, I've even read in the similar studies, like the richer you become, it's like your empathy starts to drain out of your body.
Because no one else has a lifestyle like
right,
you.
Yeah, you can only relate to like other bazillionaires. So
There's no risk
take...
of us becoming that rich anytime soon.
No. Well, I buy lotto tickets, so there's a chance, a very slim chance. 1 in 175 billion, or whatever the chances actually are.
Hey, there's still a chance.
But some fame would be nice, too. Yeah. Recognition within the circle would be okay.
I think when we talk about the big teams on the Schmoedown, Critically Acclaimed got left out of that conversation for a long time because we were on like an 8-month hiatus. That wasn't even our fault.
We weren't seen. They were just busy doing other matches.
Yeah, like it was just this weird quirk of timing, and like we just couldn't get out there, so no one thinks about it anymore. I think hopefully now we will be seen as a respectable force, at least in the teams division. And then I have a match coming up against Jeff Snyder. Is a contenders match. The winner will take on the champ Sam Levine. And
Sam Levine has kind of steamrolled over everyone. Has he lost yet?
He has not. He lost early on in his career. He hasn't lost in forever.
Yeah,
it's been a really long time. And so I think, and hell, he beat me once. So
and he's now a friend of the show. We had him on Cancel Too Soon. 2 episodes of Cancel Too Soon, our other podcast.
To talk about Freaks and Geeks and Selfie, if you want to check that out.
He's in both of those.
But I think I can take Sam. The question is, can I take Snyder? I've never played against Snyder. And Snyder is he's very confident. I just got to make sure his confidence doesn't get to me. That's my big concern. So while I freak out in anticipation of that big match, we are going to continue on with the proper episode of Critically Acclaimed. The episode for the Schmoedown with us versus MODOK can be seen on YouTube. You can also there's a link on the criticallyacclaimed.net website. And
it's on the brand new Critically Acclaimed Twitter feed. Yeah. You can follow us on Twitter.
And listen, it was a lot of fun, and we had a really, really great time organizing a very novel entrance with our competitors, MODOK. And I've been watching some of the reaction videos, and it's been pretty funny.
Yeah.
Seeing people go like, what's going on? I get it. I get jokes. So that's been a real treat.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, so this is another weird week for our brand new movie reviews because, once again, we didn't see any of the same movies.
Any common films.
Even the big one. I kept trying to go out to go see Jurassic World, and I just couldn't. So instead...
you know what? It's okay. Life gets in the way.
You know what?
I've seen it, so it's going to be covered.
I'm going to see it at some point. You tell me if you think it's going to end up on my best films of the year list. Whitney Seibold, Jurassic World: The Fallen Kingdom. Real fast, what's your relationship with the franchise?
I saw Jurassic Park when it first came out, and I left the country shortly there. It came out
you fled? Like, oh my god, they're velociraptors. We got to get out of the country.
Something happened while I was out of the country where it became bigger than I had expected. And, it was a big, monster blockbuster hit.
It was huge.
But yeah, I didn't really kind of absorb how big it was until many years later when more and more people started talking about how fond they were of it in sort of a nostalgic way. And we started booking it at midnight shows 15, 20 years after the fact, and it was selling out. People still wanted to see Jurassic Park.
It's a fun film. I would argue it's maybe one of the best monster movies ever made. I've
heard it said that it was one of sort of the last of that type of blockbuster. The blockbusters really mutated in the 1990s into something a little bit emptier and more spectacle heavy because special effects technology was advancing. So by the time you get to the mid-90s, story's really trim and the special effects are really nice, and you get stuff like Twister.
Yeah.
and even Independence Day, which is really thin on character.
Yeah. Jurassic Park,
Jurassic Park knew how, Spielberg knows how to use special effects correctly. There's not a lot of CGI. He does it right. Those dinosaurs still look fantastic.
The CGI in that movie actually still holds up because you only used it to its best possible effect. The story is very simple. The story is scientists make monsters, people come to island, monsters eat people. It's really simple. They managed to infuse it with a little bit of thoughtfulness about science and chaos theory and capitalism run amok, but just enough to keep it from feeling stupid, which fundamentally, if you think about it, it kind of is.
Well, that's what Jurassic Park 3 is.
Well, yeah.
And Jurassic Park 3, because it's 90 minutes long, it gets in, it gets out, it's a good, respectable B feature. And a lot of people give Jurassic Park 3 a lot of crap. I think it's fine.
I think Jurassic Park 3... Here's the thing with the Jurassic Park movies, and the reason why people kind of look over The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 and then go right back to Jurassic World. Even though Jurassic Park didn't really, wasn't really a part of that empty spectacle genre of blockbusters, it started it, but, it wasn't empty.
By the time you got to the sequels, however,
it felt like they were trying to do things with it that it didn't want to do. Like, oh, well, in the sequel, turns out there's this other island. Why? You didn't blow up the island in the movie.
Just go back to the same island.
Yeah, in the book, you blew up the island and it needed a new island. Just go back. You made it too complicated.
It started to smack of, like, fan pandering. It's like, well, we never really got to see a dinosaur in a city, so we're going to take a dinosaur to San Diego, and somehow the dinosaur is going to steer a boat into harbor. And I know
it killed everyone on board.
It killed everyone on board.
How?
And it's like...
It's not Dracula.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't tie the captain to the mast.
What was the name of the ship in Dracula? I totally forgot. It pulled into Whitby Harbor.
The Meter? Was it the Meter?
Maybe. I forgot the name of the ship.
I'm going to look it up. I
forgot the name of the ship in Dracula. But
That's going to drive me nuts.
It was the ship from Dracula, essentially, and, Nosferatu, but now it's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it just sort of wreaks havoc. Jurassic Park 3, like I said, I think I saw it in theaters, but like weeks after it was released. Like it was about to close. So I feel like I was on the tail end of that one, and I think that's the best way to see Jurassic Park 3. Years pass, Jurassic World comes around.
Oh, wait, we skipped Jurassic Park 2. We didn't really talk about Jurassic Park.
I said, no, we just talked about the ship pulling into the harbor.
Yeah, but we didn't talk about...
That was 2.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to say it right now. Jurassic Park 2 isn't very good.
No, it's not very good.
Even the stuff on the island, there's like a couple of cool sequences. It's an all over the place movie. It's not very good.
But yeah, so then many years pass. They decide to resurrect it with Jurassic World, which is a sequel, but they decided that it's also kind of a reboot. Mm-hmm. So people are calling this one Jurassic World 2 rather than Jurassic Park 5.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is the Demeter. I was right.
All right.
Or the Demeter.
Demeter. However you want to pronounce it. They're both correct, I think.
But yeah, Jurassic World.
And Jurassic World was a runaway monster success, and it's dumb as cheese.
It is, but I think it has an undeniable entertainment value. I think that there's... I think what they did right...
What it did is it took all of the thought and all of the intelligence and just kept all of like the exciting dinosaur parts and really ramped them up. So it's exciting from beginning to end, but there's
it's watchable.
But there's
it's
not
just
a
very
lot.
dumb.
There's one line. There's a few lines of dialogue where they refer to the dinosaurs as assets, and B.D. Wong comes back. He reprises his role and has a line of dialogue about how the people who hired him to clone more dinosaurs wanted them to look more like in the paintings, so he had to sort of like
remove the feathers,
remove the feathers and start tinkering with the DNA to make them look more like dinosaurs.
I'm actually glad they addressed that, because that's one of those things where we learn so much about dinosaurs in between the Jurassic Park movies. You do need to talk about it.
They might actually have been feathery. That's kind of
I think that's fun.
Yeah,
I think the reason
scientific.
I think the reason Jurassic World worked for people is multiple fold. I think on one hand, it had been long enough since Jurassic Park 3 that it felt a little special again to have a new one.
Yeah.
I think they had the smart idea to bring back the idea of the park. Here is the advertising itself was about visit the park. And it was finally like, hey, Jurassic Park opened. What was it going to be like? Turns out it was going to be fucking cool. There were going to be like, sea monster shows and aviaries full of pteranodons and like that fantasy of like going to that park is what drove. Yeah. It's what. Listen, when you heard the premise of the first Jurassic Park, your first thought was, I don't care if they're going to eat me. I want to go to that park. That sounds fucking cool. So Jurassic World gave you the park, even though the writing was quite bad. The thrill of it. Like that,
that idea of finally opening the park.
They understood that. And I think the other reason why it worked is that it had a vicious streak. I've equated Jurassic World to a dumber Gremlins 2. It's just rampant.
It's mayhem, and they just kill everybody because we hate people. Well, that's the thing about Jurassic World. They acknowledged, and this is something I didn't really pick up on when I first saw the Jurassic Park movies. A lot of the young kids who are watching the Jurassic Park movies didn't care about any of the people. They didn't care about Sam Neill. They didn't care about Laura Dern. They didn't even care about Jeff Goldblum.
I think they cared a little bit about Jeff Goldblum.
Maybe a little bit about Jeff Goldblum. Yeah. But the characters they liked the best were the dinosaurs. Yeah. And the good guy was the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Because he saved everyone at the end.
And the bad guys were the Velociraptors. So in Jurassic World, there was this bizarre moment where it was like, I know what I can do. I'll let another dinosaur free. Isn't that a stupid idea? It's just one more dinosaur that will kill you. No, it turns out this is the good dinosaur. It's essentially a Godzilla film. It's starting to take the mentality of a Godzilla film.
And that's fun. I love the sequence at the end of Jurassic World where the velociraptors have teamed up with the giant velociraptor.
Oh, God.
And like Chris Pratt is no longer the alpha. And then he runs into Blue, his best velociraptor friend. And there's this moment where they're staring each other down and you know that there are like subtitles that we're not reading. That was just like,
feel like
hey,
in
Chris
that
Pratt.
movie Aloha where they have conversations without speaking.
Best part of that movie, other than when they destroy a nuclear satellite with the power of 70s rock.
Golly, that was a terrible movie.
That movie sucks. But no, there's like the Blue runs up to him. It's like, hey, Chris Pratt, guess what? We're killing all the humans. Isn't that great? This guy says he's the alpha. Cut to Chris Pratt's face. Nah, dude. Still the alpha. and then the giant raptor comes
We
up.
ain't bros no more.
And then Blue's like, what? Chris Pratt says he's still the alpha. What's going on? And he's like torn between his two parents. And it's hilarious. It's so stupid. It's unapologetically stupid. And that's why I kind of dig Jurassic World. It's really dumb, but it's fun.
It's presented earnestly. It's a stupid film presented earnestly. And
that's fun.
It's fun if I got a sense that the filmmakers were also having a little bit of fun, but I think they were trying to tell like a really sort of straightforward, dramatic action picture.
I don't think that they had any high-mindedness. I think where they hit is where they aimed. I don't think I don't think they had like all these really clever ideas and they just were explored really badly. I think we were just like, hey, what if we opened another park and we were stupid about it? Okay, what if we tried to militarize it? Well, that'd be dumb. Then we'll put that in there. Great. And monster fight at the end? Badass. Done.
I started hearing rumors as long ago as before The Lost World, like before that was coming out, that there was going to be a lot of genetic tinkering with the dinosaurs to mix them with human DNA. And there were rumors floating around that there were going to be scenes of human dinosaur hybrids with like hands that were carrying machine guns.
I think that's something that was indeed floated around.
It was
I don't know how far it got, but that was like one of the pitches for one of the sequels.
Whenever it was brought up, it was laughed out of the room. If we get another film after Fallen Kingdom, it's going to have that. Because this is the trajectory we're on right now.
Just going to get progressively
It's just going to get, because...
It's going to have Goombas from Super Mario Brothers, the movie.
You know what? I'd welcome them at this point. We are a breath away from having Mechagodzilla in these movies.
What I'm interested in is... and you tell me, because we're about to talk about the forgotten Fallen Kingdom.
Forgot, whatever it is.
Yeah. We've had this progression of directors where we had Steven Spielberg, who first was about sort of the fantastical idea of the island. Then he wanted to get a little bit more dark and subversive, but it just didn't work. Then we had Joe Johnston, who is basically just playing with his toys, and I love Joe Johnston. He's like a cousin of Joe Dante. Like he's impish, but he's not acidic about it.
I feel like he's aspiring to be Zemeckis.
That's fair. That's fair, but he's just having fun. And then we had Colin Trevorrow, who clearly was going for Jurassic Park times 20. J.A. Bayona, on the other hand, is an interesting filmmaker. He directed a really great horror movie called The Orphanage. He directed you thought it was a bit hammy, but I thought it was a very beautiful supernatural tearjerker called A Monster Calls. He did this it's a problematic movie in its construction, but in terms of how it's filmed, this very impressive disaster movie, The Impossible.
I didn't see The Impossible. I heard it was quite good.
I'm bummed with how they recast the characters.
Right. They whitewashed that movie.
They did, but the actual tale that it tells is well told. So he's a good storyteller. He knows how to tell interesting stories, and he is inclined towards the dark and the spooky. And I thought that was an interesting choice to direct this movie. How does that work out?
Not at all. I don't sense any of J.A. Bayona in this at all. It feels like just, like he knows what to do with monsters. And he films his monsters very well. And the dinosaurs this time around are particularly monstrous. Like they're no longer behaving like animals. They're behaving like cartoon monsters. In fact, late in the film, they introduce a creature called an Indoraptor,
which I think is a real thing.
I think it was invented for this movie, but there's something called an Indoraptor, which is essentially like a super velociraptor, but somehow different from the one we've had before. There was a scene where it was playing dead as a character was creeping up on it. And
it is new. I'm sorry, I'm confusing with something else.
Oh, okay, yeah. There was a... And there's a shot of, like, the unconscious dinosaur head in the extreme foreground, and in the background we saw a human character sort of, like, creeping up on the Indoraptor. And because the camera's right on the Indoraptor's face, it opens its eye, and it smirks.
Like Godzilla.
Yeah, like, And you expect him to, like, reach around the human with his tail and, like, tap him on the shoulder, and he, like, spins around, and that's when he lunges.
Put on some glasses, smoke a stogie, talk like the brain gremlin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, the other raptors and I have built a crude suspension bridge to Venezuela.
What I was thinking of was a Utah raptor, which is an actual dinosaur. So that was my confusion. I'm not crazy. I'm just wrong. So what's the plot?
So the plot. Okay, so Jurassic World has been destroyed. The Bryce Dallas Howard character has become a preservationist for dinosaurs. And there's this a good, interesting Star Trek-like ethical dilemma right at the start of the movie that's abandoned really quickly. You have created new life. Now you're responsible for it. Like, this happened
that's the Frankenstein story. I mean, that's all Jurassic Park is, really. We made a monster responsible.
You see this on Star Trek all the time because they accidentally create life all the time on Star Trek. It's like, oops, my hologram is now sentient. What do we do?
Don't we have a responsibility to also save Tuvix?
What right does Tuvix have to live?
None! Tuvix sucks! Nobody liked you, Tuvix!
At least they bothered to ask the question.
I know.
We can separate Tuvix. I don't want to be separated. I like being me the way I am. Oh, wait. What rights do you have if you're an accident, like a transporter accident? So here they're genetically altering dinosaurs. They're kind of bringing them back without really having any kind of thought to it. And now Bryce Dallas Howard is asking the question, what responsibility do we have to save these animals that are running rampant on an island? Turns out the island is also a volcano.
Which is plausible.
And the volcano starts erupting. So
it's been a while since we've had a good volcano movie.
Now, as it turns out, Richard Attenborough's character from the original had Hammond had a shadow partner this whole time, played by James Cromwell. And it turns out this shadow guy, they had some sort of falling out, and they went off their separate ways. And he wants to hire Bryce Dallas Howard and Chris Pratt to go back to the island and get a bunch of dinosaurs just to save their lives and bring them, bafflingly enough, back to his mansion. Like he wants to hold the dinosaurs at his mansion. That's their. Does
he have like a
quest.
Really giant mansion and like some kind of wildlife preserve, or is it just like somewhere in Westwood, California?
Well, it's remote. It's like in upstate New York or something. So it's surrounded by woods. But yeah, he's not going to like put them in another park. Just keep them inside. They should have called the film Jurassic Manor. That would have been a great title.
That also would have been a good title.
So yeah, they go there just as everything's exploding, and there's a lot of exploding volcano action, a lot of smoke, and they manage to get a bunch of dinosaurs off the island with the help of the biggest asshole in the world, played by Ted Levine.
Okay.
Ted Levine is
Ted Levine.
Ted Levine is like a poacher who has a necklace of dinosaur teeth, and he likes torturing creatures, and you can tell that the human characters just don't matter because there's a lot of painful close-ups on the faces of the monsters, like screaming in agony as they're getting cattle prodded and stuff. It's pretty dark.
I don't want to do that. Who wants that?
And of course, Blue, the special velociraptor, is still running around the island, and they have to rescue Blue as well. And as it turns out, James Cromwell's assistant has been pulling the strings this whole time and has devious plans for the dinosaurs. There's an auction scene. This film is unbelievably stupid. It doesn't even seem to be having fun with its own stupidity. It's just, that's a stupid idea. Oh, you're running with that. Well, it couldn't be any dumber than, oh, that's a dumb idea, too. Oh, shoot.
This is my thing with Jurassic Park. I think Jurassic Park... there's only so much you can fucking do with it.
Yeah.
Because dinosaurs don't have agency. Even the cleverest dinosaurs, they don't really have schemes. They just want to be free and kill. And I don't blame them for that. It's the reason why in the Alien movies, there's always like some capitalistic thing, because the aliens just are doing what they fucking do.
They're just critters.
Yeah, Jurassic Park, the whole point is hubris. It's man's hubris. We build a park for monsters, the monsters break out. That's the story. By the time we hit the fourth movie, we'd gone so far afield of it that doing the original story again, you could get away with it. But 2 didn't really feel necessary. 3 definitely didn't feel necessary. It's not like Westworld, where like the concept of this park breaking down raises a whole bunch of really complicated questions. I kind of like the idea of, do we owe the dinosaurs anything? I think that's fair, but that's not really a plot. That's more of a conversation.
Yeah, and again, it's only brought up at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
The rest is just a bunch of dinosaur mayhem. Now that said, J.A. Bayona, like I said, knows how to shoot monsters. He knows how to make them look threatening. He knows how to make them look cool in the way they run and the way they move. Movie special effects have really reached an amazing place where they can just put a dinosaur in a room with people and you're completely convinced that there's a dinosaur.
It.
Yeah, there's a dinosaur in the room with those people. And it's a pity that it's in service of like Jaws 4 level of intelligence. Like that's kind of what we're dealing
I liked
with.
Jaws 4.
You like Jaws 4 because it's stupid.
It has a good performance, I think, in the middle of it. We talked about this in a previous episode. I think there's a couple of good things in Jaws 4 that keep it from being the complete wash most people think it is.
Okay.
But is it okay? But here's the deal: it's stupid.
Yeah,
it's pointless. Special effects. Is it fun? Is it worth seeing on the big screen?
I didn't have fun to watch. Like my eye muscles were getting tired from rolling so much. It was just you realize that the intelligence is just sort of drained out of this series. There's no wonderment anymore. And if you're gonna just make a movie as a cheap excuse to have monster mayhem, you can play it broader even than this. You can just sort of acknowledge that you're doing something really dumb, like, Blue, you're here. Use your human powers, and it like grows a human arm out of its chest and starts like wailing on people. Yeah, we're here just to see dinosaurs lay waste to humanity, and this is there's a setup for a sequel where we're just going to get even more mayhem, and I guess this is what audiences are clamoring for. From what I understand, this one's not doing as well as its predecessor.
But the predecessor was one of the most successful movies of all time.
It really was. It's
made
one of those things $500 million in a single day,
weekend,
or a single weekend,
which
that
had
never happened before.
So that's a standard of financial success that is unreasonable to expect even a sequel to hit. But it's doing okay. Good for them, I guess. I'll check it out at some point.
There's a really great actress I wanted to name check. Her name is Daniela Pineda.
Oh, I know her.
Yeah, she plays a paleo veterinarian who is working on the island, and she doesn't put up with any shit. She is sarcastic and mean. Ten Levine points a gun at her, and she kind of rolls her eyes. Just look, I just need to look after these animals. Are you going to be an asshole, or are you going to let me do it? And that's kind of the note she's on throughout the entire series, the entire movie, and she is just a delight to watch. She was really, really great, and I can't wait to see her in more things.
No.
And I like Bryce Dallas Howard. I think she's just a compelling screen presence.
I like her too. I wish she had better roles.
She can do more than she's been given in a lot of these big blockbusters.
She is such almost. I don't want to say it's effortless, but it looks effortless. She's got this effortless look about her, like she fits.
Yeah.
In most movies, particularly in anything with a fantasy element, like Pete's Dragon. I love Pete's Dragon a lot. And she's a big part of it. She's a wonderful mother figure in that movie, not just for the child, but for nature. She's another conservationist in that story. And I think she's really talented, and I think too often she is given underwritten material, and that's a damn shame.
Yeah, remember in the first Jurassic Park how we had, all these characters who had interesting, characters. They were people who had interests outside of Jurassic Park. They had things to say. They reacted in an interesting way.
It felt like Jurassic Park interrupted real lives. Everyone had other stuff going on, and that really helps. It really helps flesh them out.
Now we have Chris Pratt as, serial old 1940s film serial adventure man in a leather vest,
Indiana Jones type.
We have Bryce Dallas Howard, who she's capable, but she's more or less a Damsel type character. Like she rarely drives the action. She's just sort of along for the ride for a lot of it, even though she instigates the entire story. Daniela Pineda is the only one who kind of stands out, and even she's kind of a broad type. She's sort of like the smart-ass character. Yeah, Ted Levine is broad, evil character. And Toby Jones, who is so great in these kinds of roles.
I do love Toby Jones.
Plays like an evil capitalist who says the most cold, heartless dialogue, and he is so great.
Toby Jones is, I think, one of the better character actors we have right now.
Absolutely.
He was a great character actor when you didn't even know they were in the movie, and then they show up in a scene, and you're just like, this scene is going to be great. Everything about this, I'm about to enjoy this whole bit. It's really awesome. Like when you see at the beginning of The Mist that Toby Jones is like the checkout boy, and you're just like, oh, he's gonna be awesome later.
Something's gonna happen.
He's gonna do something cool. It's gonna be great.
I thought he was even good at playing Truman Capote.
He was
in those two Truman Capote movies that came out like right next to each other.
I loved him. He played a villain in a Doctor Who episode that is near and dear to my heart. I thought he was really great in that.
And he was also he was a CGI character in one of the Harry Potter movies. I think it was Dobby the Elf. I think it was Dobby the Elf.
Okay. Look that up before we do another Schmoedown. So that's okay. So mixed bag, mostly dumb.
Not even a mixed bag, just mostly dumb.
Oh, it sounded like there was stuff you enjoyed about it. So
no, well, again, like I said, we're a breath away from the kind of dumb, clunky mid '60s, early '70s Godzilla films, and I love those movies. Because those movies just bother to swing for the walls. They're each really short. They got space aliens and 5 different monsters. What the hell is Gigan? It's like a bird with a buzzsaw in its stomach and it has metal hooks, but it's not built. It was born. I don't
these
even
things
know.
Happen.
What's Gigan? But we're just going to put him in there because we had the costume. And
yeah, he was Dobby.
Toby Jones. That's what I thought. Okay. So if they bother to really do their research and really embrace the dumbness in the next one, because that's the trajectory we're on, then the next one might be great. It might be one of the better monster films to come along in a long time, better than the Godzilla films that America is putting out.
Yeah.
The problem is it still thinks it's a serious movie. It still thinks that it's not this sort of big, dumb, clunky mayhem thing. And why? Clearly they want to do something different.
It's a hard tone to strike. When I think about that sort of, we want people to care, but we also want to be stupid as fuck. I think about the Fast and Furious movies. And it's a tone that from Fast 5 onward, they've pretty consistently nailed.
Yeah.
And
so starting with Fast 5, really.
It's particularly Fast 5. I think Fast 4, you can see the seeds of it, but with Fast 5, they got the formula right, and they've been doing variations on it ever since.
William, it's about family.
It is. It is about family.
It's about family.
No, because you have affection for the characters. The characters are fun and they're nice and they're supportive of each other, and you want them to succeed. And everything they do is completely stupid,
completely outside of reality.
And that's fun. That's a good tone, and that's hard to pull off. And I've seen movies pull it off really well, but get rejected anyway because it's not Fast and Furious. Case in point, White House Down.
No, there you
has
go.
the exact same tone as the Fast and Furious movies. If you watched it as a spin-off of the Fast and Furious franchise, I think everyone would have loved it because it's exactly that vibe. But people weren't expecting that vibe because before that movie came out, Olympus Has Fallen came out, and that was like the gritty Die Hard in the White House movie, and it just set everyone's expectations in a different place.
Yeah, well, and Olympus Has Fallen is vastly inferior.
I would argue it is.
It's unclear. The characters are dumb. The photography even sucks in that movie.
It's the difference. I like Olympus Has Fallen, but I like Olympus Has Fallen the way I like Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, where like this is better than it should be. But White House Down is a blast, so that's the kind of vibe I think is then, these movies should be aiming for.
And then London Has Fallen. We won't get into London Has Fallen.
Was a real hoot. I want to move on. I want to move on to a film that took me really by surprise, and I want to make sure people know about it. And it's also a movie that I don't want to ruin too much about. When I reviewed this movie at The Wrap, I had to talk about some plot points more than actually I would normally like to, and here I'm going to be a little bit more vague.
Okay.
So, because I want you to have the experience. It is a new Western called Damsel, directed by David Zellner and Nathan Zellner. They previously did the film Kumiko the Treasure Hunter.
Oh, I like that movie.
I missed that one. So this is my introduction to their filmography, and this is pretty great. I want to start off by talking about the concept of the revisionist Western, which is a phrase I think gets bandied about a lot, and I don't think gets thought about very much.
Well, it's been several generations since the first generation of revisionist Western.
Yeah, so like when Westerns started becoming a dominant franchise in motion pictures, which was really early on, first off, we weren't that far away from the West. In fact, there were still places in America that operated much in the same way like the West does in movies. This is like the early 20th century. And then basically through the 1950s, there were a lot of just unironic Westerns that were about tales of heroism and, legends and romance.
And they were also really cheap to shoot, so a lot of like B pictures were also Westerns.
But they were just big stories. No, there are enormous exceptions to this. Films like The Oxbow Incident were very challenging, fascinating dramas. But the idea of the Western was very rooted in sort of narrative simplicity. And then around the 1950s, around the time of the Searchers, around the time of the spaghetti westerns, the Sergio Leone, we started getting this idea of the revisionist western, where
or deconstructionist, if you prefer.
Yeah, or something like the Wild Bunch, which is basically just like, hey, you know this world that we've romanticized? Well, it wasn't romantic.
It was actually dirty and violent. It was
dirty
kind of horrible.
And it was harsh, and it took a psychological toll on the people who lived the hardest in this environment. And a lot of the movies that came out of the sort of revisionist western idea were again, they were challenging from a genre perspective, they were challenging from a historical perspective, and that idea of the West, I think, has driven Western cinema, the cinema of Westerns.
Ever since, really.
Yeah, and I think we still keep talking. I've heard people talk about a movie that came out last year called Hostiles with Christian Bale as a revisionist Western. And I don't think it is anymore. I think that's just the vision we have of it.
We've had more revisionist westerns than we've had westerns at this point.
Yeah, and at this point, I think they're just the dominant force in the genre, which is this sort of hard-boiled, hard-bitten, wistful. Men were men, but it was also sad. You know, there'll be blood and there will be tears.
Everyone dies and everybody's filthy.
Yeah. And we're aware of the racist, enormously racist history of the Old West as well. There's an awareness of that now.
Yeah, I love what Tommy Lee Jones has been doing with Westerns, because he's been taking that like a step further to just say that, you know, it not only was it not a romantic place, not only was it a hard place, it was hell.
Yeah.
Like there's no romance to this. It will destroy you just by dint of you being there.
I didn't see The Homesman, which I know you love.
Yeah, I really like The Homesman.
I saw a contemporary Western he did called The Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, and that movie is great. And that movie is so fucking relevant right now. It's a really good movie. And yeah, he's a great director, it turns out. The reason I bring this up is because Damsel, I think, is the first quote-unquote revisionist Western I've seen in decades that feels revisionist. That feels like we're taking that revision, that, you know, but the West was sad and violent and racist, and we're going to actually have another perspective on not just the time period, but also the genre. And that in and of itself is remarkable. That in and of itself is just like, wow, you just did something totally different with it, and bless you, this feels fresh and exciting again. The movie stars Robert Pattinson from Twilight, who a lot of people still associate with Twilight.
Do we have to say he's from Twilight? He's been working pretty steadily. He's played Salvador Dali, for goodness sake.
I just want to remind people that although he's best known for that genre, he's actually been doing really interesting things as an actor. So if you missed a lot of his indie stuff, if you missed Cosmopolis, for example,
he's great in Cosmopolis.
He turns out he's a really great actor, actually, and he's really fun.
A soulless robot with working kidneys. It's a weird movie.
So he stars. It opens with this great scene of like this young man who's like waiting for a carriage to take him to the West, and an old man played by Robert Forster, who's a preacher, pastor. Who is going back from the West. He's done with it. And he's learned that there's no difference. I came here to convert the native people to Christianity. Turns out there's no fucking difference. They're no better or worse than us. Some of them are nice. Some of them are jerks. Some of us are nice. Some of us are jerks. It's all stupid. I can't believe all of this was terrible and dumb. And you know what? Here, take my Bible. Take all of my clothes. I'm just going to walk naked into the desert and die. And then he does. That's the first scene.
Oh, I love this movie already.
It's really great. He's just so fed up with the Western genre of life and of cinema. He just leaves. And then it's years later, and Robert Pattinson comes into this town, and it feels like an Alejandro Jodorowsky town, like it's full of carnies.
Okay.
And he walks in with a guitar on his back and a pygmy horse named Butterscotch. And he's here.
Okay, wait. You're starting to lose me here.
It's very odd.
Right.
And he hires a pastor, and he says, we are going to go off on a trek. I'm going to have you. You're going to meet me and my lady love, who turns out is played by Mia Wasikowska, who has a better role here than almost anything I've ever seen her in.
She doesn't get the good roles often.
She's a good actor. She doesn't get good roles a lot. And this is a good role for her. And he says, I want you to follow me. I'm going to find my lady love. Oh, by the way, she's been kidnapped. So I'm going to save her. And then as soon as I save her and kill this guy, you're just going to pop out from behind the bushes with the pygmy horse. She always wanted one. And you're just going to marry us right there.
That's the plan. Sounds like it'll definitely work.
Doesn't that sound like a great plan?
Yeah,
and there's nothing can possibly go wrong? Okay. All I will say everything goes wrong. And it completely turns the entire Western genre like on its ear. And it really looks at it from their perspective. And all I will say is this: once Mia Wasikowska becomes like joins them on the center stage, everything we thought we knew changes. Everything about her changes. Everything about the genre changes. Everything about our expectations changes. And it reveals itself to be, it was quirky before. Now we know, confirmed, this is a very biting satire.
Nice.
And it has a lot of really valid things to say, in particular about women's place in the Old West, in history, in patriarchal history.
The Homesman does that well.
And also the Western genre, and the way that a lot of women in stories are treated as a prize to be won. And
or the Penelope who's at home waiting for Ulysses to return.
Mia Wasikowska's character is named Penelope.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
I'm not fucking kidding
geez.
you. They know. They know. So,
all right, I see what you're doing there.
Yeah, this just basically takes a perspective on it, and it has no fucking patience for all of the bullshit, all of the unironic bullshit that has been building up in the West. Listen, I love Westerns, but we've had a lot of us very similar Westerns over the years. This feels different. My one problem with this movie, and I think it's a pacing problem more than anything, is that once the movie kind of reveals itself and you're about halfway through it, and we're in this type of narrative.
Okay.
It gets a little repetitive. It's kind of the same point.
Okay.
However, that is kind of the point, is to sort of establish just how pervasive and repetitive and simplistic people are. And it sells that point, but maybe it could have used a little bit more variety in the narrative in order to spike it up a bit. So maybe it feels a little longer than it needs to be. But it's funny. It's smart. Mia Wasikowska is great. Robert Pattinson is fucking great. It's a hoot, and it's totally unlike any Western I've seen in a really long time.
That sounds pretty terrific.
I don't know if it's going to be on my best films of the year list, but it's one of the best films I've seen so far this year.
Okay.
So I would definitely recommend checking out Damsel.
Very nice.
Tell me about Brain on Fire.
Brain on Fire. This is one that's on Netflix, and I wanted to see another film this week. Just got to see new films every week. So this is a true story about a New York Post reporter, a young woman who, while she was working at the New York Post and trying to get like her first big gig, started to realize that she was just fatigued all the time and she couldn't concentrate at work anymore. And she just started snapping at coworkers, and eventually it kind of figured out that she was hallucinating little things, like a dripping faucet wasn't actually dripping. She was just being kept awake. And, she goes to doctors, she goes to psychiatrists, and she just say, oh, well, maybe you're bipolar. So we're going to put you on some meds. And they put her on the meds, and she starts going even crazier. She has to move out of the office. She has to go move back in with her parents, with her mom, who's played by Carrie-Anne Moss. She has to apologize to her boss, who's played by Tyler Perry, who's a pretty good cast here. And it becomes an episode of House after a while, because she begins to go like crazier and crazier, and clearly there's like something medically wrong with her.
It's a medical mystery.
It's a medical mystery, and either it's a medical mystery or she just somehow like snapped, and we don't know why. And they keep on stressing, well, she's probably partying too hard, because a lot of these are like symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. But we don't see her drinking too hard, and she doesn't drink too hard. She drinks occasionally. Then they say, oh, she's just too much of a party girl, or she's working too hard. And it eventually stages her illness as kind of a common analysis of sort of the common milieu of the young working person who's just out of college. They're working a new job, and in this new economy, essentially have to work themselves to death just to break even. That's kind of the way the economy is shaped right now. You don't just get a job.
I'm still doing that now.
Yeah, you don't just get a job and kind of work, for a paycheck and go home and your bills are okay. You have to work overtime. You have to kill yourself. You have to be really, really visible, and that's what the economy is. And the implication for a while there is that this sort of work environment is literally driving people to death. They're going completely out of their minds.
That sounds like a great David Cronenberg type movie.
If it were played that dark, but it plays very like a common Hollywood melodrama about sort of her the relationship with her boyfriend, and her relationship with her dad is strained, and her parents are divorced, and she can't really. and she doesn't know what's going on. It's all about the mystery. Chloe Moretz is a really great actress. She was really proving herself, when she was young, when she was a girl. And now she's a young woman, and she's just proving herself to be increasingly dynamic as her career goes
really
on.
very too. Like I'm not a big fan of the movie. She's hilarious in Neighbors 2.
Yeah,
she gives one of the better comedic performances in the last few years in Neighbors 2. She is fucking hilarious.
She really understands the character and also how to be funny. And here she's really good at sort of getting that desperation. But of course, her illness eventually takes a turn for the worse, and she's essentially comatose for a long portion of the movie. And it becomes about the parents just fretting about what's going on. There's, they pressure the doctors. It's just them stressing out over her illness. It's a true story. I'm sure all of that happened, but I feel like I've seen that in 100 movies before. And it's not something interesting like in The Big Sick, where it's about the development of these other relationships that go on outside of her.
Well, the movie I kept thinking of as you were describing it, and you were describing it as, this mysterious illness, and it's a metaphor, and I was thinking of Todd Haynes' Safe.
Yeah, I was thinking of Safe a lot too.
It's one of the creepier movies of the '90s, and it stars a younger Julianne Moore before she was big.
Yeah, Safe is terrific because she has this mysterious ailment, and they never peg it.
Yeah, we don't even. For all we know, by the end of Safe, it could be psychosomatic.
Yeah, it could just all be in her mind.
The idea is that here's a woman, and she starts thinking that all of the chemicals that are in the air, some of which are very real and well-known health hazards, some of which are just sort of general.
This is the 1950s, so there's like DDT and stuff around.
Was this in the 1950s?
Oh no, I guess it was.
It has that vibe. It's a lot of Todd Haynes stories
fashioned like the 1950s, but I guess it's set in the present.
So she starts isolating herself more and more and more to the point where
she has to go through like these big, long medical processes just so she can sleep through the night and breathe clearly.
And it's not about the disease; it's just about what's driving her to that, and it's very disturbing. To see how far she will go to protect herself from the world in every conceivable way. And it's kind of a bummer that you take such a really compelling premise and sounds like they just didn't do anything terribly interesting with
it. I mean, it's a true story. It's about a woman who was sick and they didn't know what it was, and then they did a biopsy on her brain. They figured out what it was and they cured her, and that's great. And it turns out she had a really rare autoimmune disease that was essentially her body was attacking her brain. And the coda of the film, and I'm sorry to take you through this entire movie, but it's all a true story. She wrote articles about it. Was we have to start pondering if somebody begins to act crazy, are they crazy or do they just have an illness, like a physical, medical, diagnosable, curable illness? And you begin to think back over history and the way medical history treated, quote, the hysterical woman. Or just crazy people in general, just throw them into this, bedlam, and they just sort of go comatose. Could have been they just had this illness. And it kind of gives you a brief moment of poignancy that, that our medical history and our history of our relationship to insanity might be worth another look. But it doesn't delve. It's just sort of like almost the epilogue. It's like the PS on the film.
That's too bad.
So it's really well put together, but it's really, really typical. The saving grace is Chloe Moretz because she's such a great performer. But it feels like a really good, solid Hollywood film. I'm surprised it's straight to Netflix. This could have easily been a theatrical release, but because we don't do mid-budget in theaters anymore, it's going straight to Netflix.
Well, let's keep talking about mediocrity. The Catcher was a spy. Okay. So
when I think of spies, I think of Paul Rudd.
Okay, first off, I like Paul Rudd.
I like Paul Rudd a lot.
This actually has a really good cast. It's got Paul Rudd, it's got Connie Nielsen, it's got Paul Giamatti, it's got Jeff Daniels. It's from the director of The Sessions, which is a really good movie. This is the true story of Major League Baseball, and he's played for multiple teams, so I don't know what team he's from, but there's a Major League Baseball player in the 1930s named Moe Berg. Moe Berg was a catcher. He was considered a good, but maybe not the most amazing player ever. He was notable for being kind of overeducated for his job. He graduated Princeton magna cum laude. He spoke like a half dozen languages. He did trivia shows.
And he was a ball player.
He was a baseball player. Right. And he was a spy in World War II. All this,
right.
all this stuff is true.
Okay.
So you can imagine some screenwriter or director finding out about this larger-than-life person and going, ooh.
That's a movie right there.
It is a movie. It sounds like an interesting movie. You have a Major League Baseball player who is also a spy, who is also really brilliant, and according to the movie, and I tried to do some research on this, and near as I can tell, this is speculative or apocryphal, never 100% confirmed. According to the movie, also gay, or at least bisexual.
Okay.
And
had male lovers.
And was Jewish. So on a couple of different levels, he was, ran the risk of being ostracized in the 1930s and 1940s. So the movie stars Paul Rudd as Mo Berg, and towards the beginning of the film, World War II breaks out, and he offers his services to the American government. He speaks multiple languages. He knows a lot about various regions. He's a patriot, and he thinks they enlist him to be a spy. And one of the things that the movie does is when Jeff Daniels, who plays his boss, hires him, he asks, "Are you gay?" And he says, "I don't care if you are. I just care if you can help us fight the Nazis."
Okay.
And Paul Rudd just says, "I'm good at keeping secrets."
Okay.
As though being gay was a superpower. And
well, it is, isn't it?
Well, and that's the thing that I started getting a little excited about this movie, because the idea of here is a Jewish, according to this movie, gay or bisexual, World War II and sports hero who was involved in an attempted assassination against Heisenberg to prevent him from building a nuclear bomb for the Nazis. And I'm like, oh my God, is this going to get pulpy? Because if this is pulpy, I'm in.
I'm not really sure about this Heisenberg assassination. Get it? Get it? That's a math joke.
But yeah, it is. That's pretty good. But I'm with you. Like this sounds so insane. Like this sounds like such a big story, and it is dramatically stayed. It's really just
so
light
it's
and
the
minor.
Imitation Game all over.
Yeah,
again.
it is actually.
Yeah,
the Imitation Game knew at least when to push the melodrama once in a while, but this is a quiet, conversational. There's one shootout. Makes no impression. I'm not saying they needed to inject his life story with a bunch of unneeded action, but you do want to inject it with intensity and emotional drama and strife and suspense, and it never really does that. Everything just feels kind of pleasant. I get the impression that the director, Ben Lewin, thinks this story is kind of neat. And indeed it is. It's also fucking crazy. Tell the story. Tell the story. Really, let it play. I mean, he's not the most well-known figure in American history, even in sport. I mean, he's famous in sports history, but he's not the most well-known sports figure in history. Play him up a bit. Let him. Let's elevate his legend a bit. Enjoy. And here it's just they're not making the most of the material. They're actually doing very little with the material. And Paul Rudd is okay, but he has almost nothing to work with. Mark Strong is actually pretty good as Heisenberg.
Oh, I like Mark Strong.
I like him too. He's another guy who's just...
I never like his movies, but I like him.
He's the new Oliver Platt. Have you noticed that? He's always great. The movie usually sucks. There's a few good Mark Strong movies. He was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, but mostly no.
He's in stuff oh golly, what was that horrible, Brothers
Grimsby.
Brothers Grimsby.
That movie is shit.
That is a loathsome film.
That movie is... I hate that movie. I think that was the last movie I seriously considered walking out of. I still haven't done that in a professional...
Yeah.
I've never walked out of a movie I've had to see it. I don't think I've ever walked out of a movie at all unless there was some sort of medical emergency. But
Mark Strong was game enough to
do some disgusting
climb
things.
into disgusting places and stick disgusting things in disgusting places, and it was... He's game, and I admire him for it. But don't watch the Brothers Grimsby because it's terrible.
He deserves better material. He's good in this. I really like him in this. In fact, in many ways, I think he has the best performance in the movie. If you find the historical anecdote interesting, this is okay. It feels like it would have been a pretty good made-for-TV movie in the 90s. It would have gotten a couple Emmy nominations. Maybe Mark Strong would have won something, but that's it.
The pre-Oz HBO days.
Yeah, when a TV movie were well-intentioned based on true stories that occasionally had a pretty good actor in them. Or one really good actor who was a little past their prime and couldn't get the great roles on theater films anymore.
Right.
Yeah, that's this film. So it's a bit of a downer. It's not terrible, but it's not very good either. So
That's a pity because I really like Paul Rudd.
Me too.
He's terrific.
Yeah, and it's an interesting starring role for him. It just doesn't do anything with it.
Is he playing against type, or is he that sort of like affable, funny asshole?
He's not an asshole. He's affable. There's a cute bit where he's asked to join an all-star baseball team, and they even just flat out say, I mean, like, Babe Ruth is going. You're here because they heard you can speak Japanese. And he's like, I don't speak Japanese. And they're like, well, fake it. So there's a bit where, like, he apparently learned, a couple of sentences. So while everyone else is being introduced to all these important Japanese businessmen, Babe Ruth's made him, I was going to be Mo Berg says, in Japanese, I don't know how to speak Japanese. I learned how to say these few sentences, so bear with me. I want to convince my friends that I speak Japanese. So when I'm done talking, could everyone please laugh and then pat me on the back amiably? Thank you.
That's all I say.
And then they do, and he looks like a badass. So he's clever, and we like him, but he's not a smarmy jerk the way that Paul Rudd can pull off and make you really, really likable.
That's Paul Rudd's superpower.
That's his shtick. Yeah. That's what he's good at. That's what you want him to do. He can be like this really adorable every person, but it always feels like he's playing it up. Like a little bit, even in like I Love You Man, a movie I really, really like. He's so out of it. He's adorable. Like when he's smarmy, he's perfect. And he's not really smarmy here. And I kind of wish he was. If he'd been allowed to like amplify the charm a bit and like really bring out this material, it could have been great. Anyway, on the critically acclaimed scale.
What do you give it?
On our scale of C- to C+, with C- being don't bother, C+ is great, C is eh. Catcher as a Spy is a high C-. I really don't the material, if the idea interests you, it might be worth it, but like generally speaking, you would turn this off after about half an hour. It just doesn't really grab you. Brain on Fire.
Brain on Fire, I'll give it a low C. Like, it's not incompetent, it's perfectly serviceable, but there's not a lot of creativity. There's not an important enough message to really warrant elevating it.
Damsel, I give a definite B+. It's a high B+.
You mean C+. You said B+.
If only I could. No, it's a C+. It's a C+. It's a high C+. And I think maybe it has some pacing issues, but I think ultimately what it is doing as a comedy and as a Western and as a social satire is very special and deserves to be celebrated and seen. So definitely check that out if you love Westerns in particular.
I do want to see it. I'm not even a Western fan, but that sounds fantastic.
Cool.
So, and as for Jurassic Kingdom Fallen World, or whatever the hell they're calling it these days, C-. It is just so dumb. It is so dumb. It's so dumb.
So, speaking of dumb,
let's get to Vanilla Ice.
Yes, who was in 1991 as cool as ice.
Cool as Ice, from the director of the Inspector Gadget movie and some Playboy videos. It was the vanity project of Vanilla Ice. Vanilla Ice was maybe the biggest hip-hop artist in history at this point.
He was a very big star for a few years.
Ice Ice Baby was at number 1 for 16 straight weeks, and that's unheard. I think it was the first hip-hop single to do that. And the world was kind of clamoring for somebody like Ice Ice Baby, and that they needed rap that was... I mean, let's be frank, safe for white kids.
Yeah. There's a history, there's a long history in pop music where basically the mainstream takes over and homogenizes interesting music into bland, and generic, safe version, quote-unquote safe versions of it.
This was after Public Enemy. This was after NWA. Hip-hop was already like a really important cultural force at this point. But there was a lot of concern from like the hand-wringing politicians. Oh, this is a little too violent for kids. That is suburban white kids, more or less. That's what they were really... That was the code. We understood what they were really saying at the time.
Yeah.
And so along came a lot like acts that were a lot safer, like DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince and MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice, that were softer. And at the time, they got a lot of grief for being soft. And Vanilla Ice was mocked in particular because he kept on rapping about how he was hard and nobody was convinced.
There's nothing about him that's convincing. In this movie, he gives off this vibe about how he's an orphan, he comes from the streets, and everything's really, really hard for him, and his sunglasses have in shiny letters Gautier. And you just can't take that shit seriously. Everything about what he's telling you is completely betrayed by everything you see.
He put out a record. Some people took some notice of it. It was remixed into "To the Extreme," which was sort of this big hit. He was only 19 when that thing hit, too. Yeah. He was young. The record label came up with his look. He didn't decide, I'm going to wear blue jeans with "Yep Yep" painted on the side and ride a gigantic neon green Kawasaki motorcycle. That's going to be my look. That wasn't organic. That was all manufactured. Nobody bought it. Except everybody bought the record.
Yeah.
Huge hit. Thanks to its success, it caused Vanilla Ice a lot of trouble. And I'd love to tell the Suge Knight story, where Suge Knight stalked him around and ended up stalking him into a hotel with a known football player.
This is alleged though, right? I mean,
this according to Robert Van Winkle, aka Vanilla Ice, this actually happened, and Suge Knight dangled him off of a balcony and said, "Hey, give us some of that Ice baby money. We're just going to rob you." He was in a bad place at the time, so he said, "Sure, I'll sign a contract. I'll give you a little bit of this money." Suge Knight took that money and founded Death Row Records.
It's a hell of a thing.
It's a hell of a story.
He had a hell of a life.
In the midst of this, along came Cool as Ice. And Cool as Ice is so stupid.
I've talked a lot on podcasts throughout my career about these interesting transitional phases. We like to think of cinema as kind of tidally taking place in decades. Oh, the 80s was such an interesting decade. The 30s was such an interesting decade. What is the definition? How are we defining the 2010s as a decade? It takes a few years. And usually there's a flashpoint. There's one point where the previous decade dies a couple of years into the new decade. In the 80s, I consider this to be between Friday the 13th 3D and Friday the 13th 4. Somewhere in the middle there, the 80s became the 80s, 100%. And for me, the last gasp of the 1980s is in 1991 with Cool as Ice. Cool as Ice is everything the 80s has got shoved into one movie just to get it all out of our system.
I have a feeling when something like Pulp Fiction hit, that's kind of when the 90s began, and that wasn't until 94. So yeah, we were still kind of living through a lot of the 80s, a lot of that fashion.
I think the 80s died here. I think the 90s didn't find its groove for a couple more years. That's what I'm saying. Because Cool as Ice is... You might recall that there are people who would describe movies, and I don't really do it anymore because MTV doesn't have an identity, but they describe them as MTV movies. Often they were directed by people who directed a bunch of music videos. A lot of these films were directed with a lot of visual verve and inventiveness, a lot of super fast editing.
Editing was really kind of a big part of it.
There are a few filmmakers who emerged from MTV and that school who became very big in one level or another. Michael Bay, David Fincher, Spike Jonze, and a lot of the more interesting ones survived. Michael Bay found a niche in the blockbuster market. But when we think about MTV movies, what we're really thinking about is Cool as Ice.
Specifically.
It is an incredibly simple story in which Vanilla Ice and his crew ride their bright Gem and the Holograms motorcycles into a suburban town.
Well, we are introduced to them rapping, and we see what their lives are when they're sort of at their high point.
Which is basically...
And it's essentially going into featureless basement rooms where all of the fans have lights behind them, and there's a mist hanging in the air, and everybody just sort of flails about to Vanilla Ice music.
Exactly.
It's this weird kind of... It looks like hell.
It looks like Hellraiser 2.
Yeah, it's like you expect chains to leap out, or somebody yells bloodbath, and all the vampires start bathing in blood, and then Blade shows up and murders everybody.
Yeah.
It looks horrible, and that's supposed to be the ecstasy, the height of his music.
Anyway, so he does a show. It's the whole opening credit sequence. The music is not good.
Yeah.
It's okay to maybe, but let's not go nuts.
Gonna hold on to this feeling. Naomi Campbell sings the hook.
That's true. That's kind of fun. And then they get on their motorcycles. They're bright neon motorcycles, and then they drive aimlessly forever, and then they end up in a suburban town.
Just like Kerouac, man.
And as they drive past a young woman who is riding a horse, Vanilla Ice decides to pop a wheelie, jump his bike off of an invisible ramp right in front of the horse, presumably scaring it, possibly to death. She might have to put that horse down. And then he gets upset with her when she's mad. And that is their relationship in a nutshell. He's a dick, and she is gradually charmed by it.
And, well, God bless the actress, I think is named Kirsten Minter?
Kristen Minter.
Kristen Minter. And Kristen Minter, yeah, God bless her, like, is able to look at Vanilla Ice as if he's, like, a viable mate. Not only does she look at him as if he's sort of like a charming, handsome dude, but, like, she looks at him with unbridled lust. Meanwhile, he looks back and he's a board. He's like... He's two planks glued together. He has no charisma whatsoever.
He's posturing. He's not acting. He's posturing. There's a lot of shots of him like laying back on his motorcycle in the middle of the desert for no reason. He's not even reading. I don't know. He's just thinking important thoughts, whatever they are, ice-wise.
What rhymes with nail?
And he'll say things like, drop that zero and get with the hero, or I'm going to go across the street and sling a schlong, or don't mind me, I'm just coolin'.
That's right, just coolin'.
For me, my favorite moment of Vanilla Ice's acting comes early in the movie, after he has terrified her horse, almost killed her, and then stolen her day planner. For no reason.
Because he's a rebel, man.
He's cool as ice, damn it. He, like, ends up, like, getting, like, one of his friends has their bike breaks down, and they end up getting it, like, fixed at a house across the street from Kathy, who turns out her name is Kathy. And he's introduced to her. And she says, oh, it's Kathy. And then Vanilla Ice says, Kathy. And then he looks at her very seriously. Cat. I have just renamed you.
Like, she was dubbed by the High Court.
Yeah, he just changed her name.
Yeah.
Not even, you can call me Cat. Like, no.
You're not a Kathy. You're a cat.
You're Cat now. Yeah. I have named you. Join me on my motorcycle of destiny. It's just so fucking... Everything about him is presumptuous as fuck. Like, it's insane. And everything about the movie is equally insane.
Well, the story, so it doesn't really kick in until like maybe 20 minutes from the end, because it's more or less a romance between Vanilla Ice and Kristen Minter.
Yeah, he's from the wrong side of the tracks. Allegedly, we don't really see that. And then
I don't. No, he clearly doesn't fit in sort of the suburban setting they're putting him, and that's the idea. In fact,
it's like an Edward Scissorhands perfect suburbia kind of thing.
And he finds like the one weirdo. They're drawn to each other, and the weirdo just happens to be a motorcycle expert who can fix their motorcycles, which I guess are broken, even though they ride up on them and they seem to be functioning just fine.
Yeah,
there was no talk. Oh no, our motorcycles. And so now they're in the middle of this tiny suburban town. I think it's supposed to be Michigan, but it was shot in California.
I thought it was supposed to be California, but whatever.
Okay. And they just sort of bum around the small town for a little bit.
Yeah.
He breaks into her house at some point.
Oh, and he wakes her up by dropping ice in her mouth, which feels really violating. It's really gross.
It's also one of the sexiest damn shots, maybe in cinema history, because...
Well, in a vacuum.
Because this film was photographed by, of all people, Janusz Kaminski.
You know that name because he was the cinematographer for Schindler's List and every Spielberg movie thereafter.
Since, yeah.
He which basically probably means that Steven Spielberg watched Cool as Ice and said, get me that guy.
Yeah.
And you can see early on, this is way more wild and cartoonish than most of Janusz Kaminski's work, but you can see, like, he loves his blown out windows where you can't see what's going on outside. It's just this hazy light glow. That's in every Spielberg movie now, and that's here in Cool as Ice. So I interviewed Janusz Kaminski, actually, and I asked him about Cool as Ice, and he had very fond memories of it, and just as a cinematographer, his whole job was to make it look interesting, and there were no rules. Just
nobody's
do stuff.
looking. Yeah.
He had a blast. There was no one to tell him no. He had a good time making this movie.
You look at that one shot. First of all, she's like laying in bed and she's in under things, and it looks like a Playboy video because that's
the director was
good
at that.
Was good at that, and so everything's really hazy and everything's sort of white or off-white. In fact, if you look at the entire color scheme of this movie, you can tell Janusz Kaminski is dictating a lot of it because everything's really kind of vague and beige or gray, and then
Vanilla Ice
steps
pops
Vanilla
in.
Ice, and he is every color of the neon vomit rainbow. Yep, an attitude. Somebody on IMDb actually wrote down every word that is on his jacket.
What? His jacket? He has this dark black jacket with bright white lettering, and the biggest lettering on the back is "Down by Law," as if he's a big Jarmusch fan. And I don't buy.
You know what? Looking at his hair, maybe so.
Well, maybe so.
But you can tell that Janusz Kaminski is balancing colors really well in all of these shots because he has this big cartoony figure to put in the middle of all these shots, so he's going to mute all the colors in the background. That's actually really wise photography. So he walks up to this prostrate young woman in bed who's in this white outfit, and he's wearing all these bright colors, and he drops the ice into her mouth. We see the glisten in the dripping water, and she exhales and steam comes out of her nostrils.
For now, she is cool as ice.
She is now cool as ice. Like, his influence has entered her. Now she is breathing Vanilla Ice. It's actually this beautiful poetic shot in this piece of shit movie.
If it was in a music video, it would be justly celebrated. And here's what I'm going to say about Cool as Ice. As dumb as this movie is, and it's mega dumb, it's not boring. It's really
nothing, even though nothing happens in it.
Even though nothing happens in it. Like, he goes to this town, they wait to get their motorcycle done, and then it turns out that Kathy's father, played by Michael Gross from the Tremors movies.
I interviewed him about this.
Yeah. Her dad, it turns out, stole money from the mob and has been in hiding all of these years.
Witness protection, it turns
And then she is like some wunderkind, valedictorian, horse riding, Olympian, whatever. And she's like interviewed on TV, and there's a shot of him, and then a couple of mobsters see him, and then they track him down to his house, and Michael Gross gets mixed up, and he thinks that Vanilla Ice is working with them.
Yeah.
And that's why he forbids her to see...
This all happens late in the movie, though.
Yeah, pretty late.
Yeah.
And then her little brother gets kidnapped, and Vanilla Ice is accused, and then he,
There's that wonderful scene, that wonderful illogical scene where somebody is able to, jump a motorcycle through a wall or a window, and there's no way, if you do that in real life, there's no way you'd know where you'd land.
Yeah, you'd probably plow through people
you'd
if you're
land,
lucky.
Yeah, you'd land on something and you'd die. The most egregious example of this was in, I think it was Resident Evil, the third one, Extinction. One of the, those movies are all pretty terrible, but there's a scene where Mila Jovovich, bursts through a church's stained glass window.
It's the second one, Apocalypse.
It's the second one, where it's 30 feet off the ground. First of all, how did she get up that high? So can't you just go in the front door?
She's very talented.
And then somehow she's able to backflip the motorcycle, and those movies are so bad.
But that's the point, is it's all just nothing but cool.
Yeah.
And he keeps talking about, and it's so weird though watching this movie, because you look at just the idea of his coolness. He's supposed to be outside the norm, and they're selling him that way. This is clearly part of the Vanilla Ice marketing campaign, where no, he's not a corporate product. He's not the safe version of rap music. He's a rebel, Dottie, and he's insanely safe because he actually isn't doing anything terribly rebellious.
He's actually very heroic in the only things he does. He brings more interesting music to this very square town. I wish it were a little bit more like Footloose, where they were
oppressed in some way.
They were an active community trying to keep that kind of music down, so maybe he could be a rebel.
That could have been fun. Yeah, there's really not enough against him right now. It's just sort of against the idea of squareness. But there's the antagonist of the movie has... Here's the problem. The antagonist of the movie isn't Vanilla Ice's antagonist.
No.
It's Kathy has a jerk boyfriend, but even he doesn't he tries to start a fight, and he's kind of controlling about Kathy, and you don't want her to end up with that guy. But he's not evil, and he never does anything to really do serious, grievous harm. At least not intentionally. And then the criminals, they're against her dad.
Yeah. Well,
it's not Vanilla Ice's movie. It's her dad's movie.
This is an echo of an echo. we've talked before on the show about how the 1980s were really a reflection of the 1950s. There was this new wave of conservatism in America in the 1980s, so we started to look back to what conservatives in the 80s were trying to harken back to, and it turns out it was the 1950s. So you see a lot, and plus the people who are watching movies as kids in the 50s are now making movies in the 80s. So there's a lot of that influence.
And the who are making movies about the 80s right now are inspired by the 80s. We're the ones who grew up in the 80s. So it's all cyclical.
We're on the next wave of that cycle.
In the 2030s, we'll get movies about the 2010s.
That's just the way it's going to operate. So what we are having here is a story from the 1950s where we can kind of culturally take for granted the notion of the rebel, the notion of the squares, the things we had kind of internalized in that Jungian sort of way, in that Hegelian sort of way, if you will. I get to use the word Hegelian because I know what it means, damn it.
Okay. What does it mean?
Just relating to Hegel.
You can't just do that.
Yeah, well,
you can't use a word to define itself. Who is Hegel? What is Hegel? Why is Hegel?
Hegel, one of the many notions he introduced came up with the idea of sort of like how nations have what he called the zeitgeist. He was the one who sort of popularized that word. How there is a kind of unifying factor about a nation. I'm probably getting it way oversimplified, and there's philosophy majors out there railing at me right now. But
a lot of philosophy majors listen to our show.
They can.
I'm sure they do. I'm not saying they don't. I said they do. You're the one who's a jerk.
But we're tapping into all of these sort of broad archetypes that by the time we get to Cool as Ice, they're not even bothering to establish any of these things anymore. These are just archetypes that we're supposed to instantly recognize. So that Vanilla Ice does nothing and is expected to be the hero is something that's kind of an echo that began in the 1950s. We're kind of reliving the rebellious spirit of a 50s youth in the 1980s in the clothing of the early 90s.
Right.
Before we move on to our B feature, because that's actually a pretty good segue.
It's a great segue. You kind of wasted it.
Right. Okay, well, let's just segue then, because
real fast.
Where that pebble landed, where these ripples began, is our selection for a B feature.
And I forgot to put a guessing game for Cool as Ice up on Facebook. I realized that as we started recording, I'm like, I should look up. I forgot to put one up this week.
Oh, rats.
Because we came up with our double feature super early, and then I was like, I'll wait and do it up a little later in the week, and I just never got around to it. Okay. So you had. It's kind of an obvious one, but it's a movie that has left a huge ripple effect on culture and isn't really talked about all that much as a movie anymore. It's talked about it more as a style, and it's a movie called...
A style and an actor,
Yeah, and it's a movie called The Wild One, which is a biker movie starring Marlon Brando in the Vanilla Ice role. And I get to say that. That's fun.
Marlon Brando as Vanilla Ice.
Yeah.
He plays a character named Johnny.
Yeah. This is a movie from 1953. And it's loosely based on a true story about a bunch of bikers who came into a small town and they riled things up, and there was a bit of a misunderstanding and tragedy. And but the plot of the movie is Marlon Brando is the leader of a biker gang. And they wander around, basically rabble-rousing, not doing anything too evil, just disturbing the peace, messing with people,
and
but not killing anybody, not robbing banks, just being young and shitty.
And this is when the World War II was over. Everybody was sort of like settling in, and the new generation of youth started to sort of realize they're bored. There's nothing to do here.
Yeah,
and the parents just expected them to lay back and appreciate everything that had been lost and had been fought for. But none of that was being put into context for the young people. So when they looked around and they realized nothing's going on, cars are kind of a novelty at this point. They're kind of going out on the road and creating their own culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of the older generation was deathly afraid of this. And this was kind of the birth of the American teenager as we know it.
Yeah, in fact, the movie begins with a title card that basically says it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Like, this could only happen here, or could it? We need to prevent tragedies like this from ever happening again.
It's really condescending.
It is, and it's interesting because it illustrates something that I'm embarrassed I had to have explained or reminded to me once. But I was at the Christmas party of fellow film critics Alonzo Duralde and Dave White. And they were watching
great film critics, both
brilliant film critics. You should listen to their podcast, Linoleum Knife. They are smart, witty, insightful. They're great. and you should definitely listen to them. But they had a bunch of really old, like Christmas specials on, and there were some I had never seen, the point was it was so white.
Yeah,
like just lily white, generic, bland, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean like when you think about like the image of the 1950s,
the things white people like, sort of.
Yeah, like I brought it up earlier. You look at Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands and the way he depicts suburbia. That is a parody of the perception of white culture, and yet you watch these Christmas specials,
and it's not too far off. Is it? Yeah,
and he brought up something really important, which is, back then, there was a culture to be counter to.
Yeah,
we think of counterculture. Counterculture is kind of everywhere right now. Like there are all kinds of culture, and they're all kind of jumbled up together. There was a pervasive idea of like what America was, and it was wrong, or at least simplified, or too narrow focused. But it was the idea of America that was shared by a lot of popular culture, a lot of movies, a lot of books. And when that got shook up, it felt really threatening to people. And The Wild One is about that. It's about youthful gangs asserting themselves, challenging the status quo.
But not in a fun way. There were a lot of like sort of really pandery JD, that is juvenile delinquent films that were actually made for the parents.
Yes.
And they were really sensationalistic. And
there were horror stories, basically.
There were horror stories. The sins were especially bad, and the squares were especially square, and everything was really exaggerated, and everyone was expected to rub their hands and say, "Oh, tut tut," while secretly getting off on the sin of it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And The Wild One feels a lot more natural, and I think is one of the better ones of these movies.
It's one of the more respectable ones.
Because the youthful rebellion is actually kind of the perspective we see it from. It's, even though we get a lot of cutaways to like the cops and, the people living in this small town saying, "Oh, well, things are getting pretty bad," we're actually invited to live among the bikers and understand their dramas and understand the need they have to just be aimless, because being aimed is far too repressive in 1953.
One of the most quotable line from this movie, and it's one of the most quotable lines ever, which is when someone asks Marlon Brando, "What are you rebelling against?" And without even thinking about it, he's not even making points, like, "What do you got?"
Yeah.
"I'll rebel against anything. You just tell me. Like, I need to rebel. I need to fight back. Everything is just kind of oppressive and samey, and I have no interest." Yeah. And Marlon
Brando creates such an indelible character in Johnny. I don't know how much he controlled the look, but that look, it's in every movie now.
Yeah,
that's what a biker looks like now. It's like we know what Dracula looks like because of Bela Lugosi. We know what bikers look like because of Brando in The Wild One.
And he really, it's interesting because he's too old for this role. Like, he's nearly 30 at the time. He's probably playing like a 19-year-old at most. Yeah.
And then Lee Marvin plays another teenage gangster who's like 55.
He's the same age as Marlon Brando, but he looks 55. In fact, Lee Marvin's whole gang looks like it's made up of 40-year-olds. Yeah, like, it's the casting is all over the place. This is back when you could still have 40-year-olds playing Romeo and Juliet in movies, and no one said anything.
If you look at a high school yearbook from the 1950s, they all look older. And this is when there was there was no teenage years. You were a child, and then something changed, and you were an adult now. You were a young adult. But thinking of a teenager as a separate class of people was something that was just beginning to form at the time.
And partially with The Wild One.
Yeah.
And certainly getting codified through it. So what Marlon Brando is, he's kind of a lunk. It opens with them going to a motorcycle race and not participating, but stealing a second place trophy, which he then protects with his life as if he won it.
He straps it to his bike.
And his gang is just, a bunch of dumb kids who like accosting like people verbally, but not actually really committing any crimes to speak of. You could say they're loitering.
Yeah,
or being a nuisance, but they're not actually doing anything bad. They're just annoying and calling a lot of attention to themselves. A lot of bikers do.
Which is, calling attention to yourself was particularly daring in the 1950s when conformity was the word of the day. Everybody had to be kind of quiet and keep to themselves and fulfill their very basic function within your small American town.
So when they go to the small town, much like in Cool as Ice, and his whole gang starts carousing in the streets and yelling at the various people who live there and calling them squares. Brando walks away from it, goes into a cafe, orders himself a beer, starts chatting up the nice girl named Kathy. They knew what they were doing. She was named after the Vanilla Ice movie character.
Yeah.
And
clearly the directors of The Wild One had watched Vanilla Ice.
Big
We're
fans.
really familiar with Vanilla Ice.
And we see that Marlon Brando is a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more sensitive than you might expect.
Maybe not thoughtful, but has an emotional intelligence.
Yeah, he's a real person who acts this way. He's not just surface. But what's interesting is that, and in fact, I saw a lot of the DNA of Saturday Night Fever in here as well, because we see there's a little bit of flirtation, a little bit of attraction with him and Kathy, and that she finds his lifestyle appealing, but she's very much ingrained in her ways and doesn't want to take off with him or anything. Towards the second half of the movie, when there's more conflict, another gang rolls into town led by Lee Marvin. That leads to fights, and the people in town start getting angry about all these bikers.
The rival gang named the Beatles, by the way.
And some people think that was a direct influence on the naming of the band, the Beatles. I don't know how true that is.
They've denied it.
Okay.
Some people have asked, we were big fans of the Wild One because you wore the leather jackets. No, we were fans of Buddy Holly and the Crickets. That's what we were going after.
Fair enough. But there was a bit where they escape town to just run off together. And there's sort of a romantic shot of them driving through the woods of Johnny and Kathy. And then when they stop, he gets really aggressive.
Yeah.
And to the movie's credit, it doesn't say that's okay. Kathy is not happy with it. And I got that vibe. That's another thing that happens in Saturday Night Fever as well, is we see this guy who's being set up as romantic and young and wild, and the movie just and he took that way too fucking far and he's pulled back.
Way too far. Yeah. That's a Saturday Night Fever is not all white suits and fun. That is a really, really dark movie.
This is the darkest scene in The Wild One for me. Someone dies in The Wild One.
Someone dies in The Wild One.
I can't remember if he just got hurt, but no, he died. That's the darkest scene between him and Kathy.
Brando was driving his motorcycle. Somebody hurled a tire iron and hit him in the head, and he fell off his bike, and his bike, without him on it, ended up.
I was just trying to remember if the guy died or not, but yeah, he died.
He died.
Yeah. But that's the darkest bit, when you see that they're not romanticizing the hero, although they do obviously find him. They understand his appeal.
They understand his appeal, and they really are putting their finger very firmly and very accurately on kind of a dispirited, disposable, being dissed by society feeling that a lot of teenagers have, a lot of adolescents have. I saw a lot of Holden Caulfield going on here. Holden Caulfield, who had very clear ideas as to kind of what he wanted to do with his life, but that wasn't really in sync with any kind of reality.
Yeah, in fact, Holden Caulfield actively and we're talking about The Catcher in the Rye if you haven't read it, but and you should. But a lot of the things that he says, a lot of the ideals that he espouses, a lot of things that he criticizes, he does himself. Yeah. Or he doesn't do. He is himself the phony that he accuses everyone else of being.
He accuses everybody of being a phony, as these weird kind of, ideals in his brain, but he's also just too socially awkward, just doesn't know how to communicate these things. It's and somebody asks him where the title of the book comes from. What do you want to do? Well, I just want to catch children. I want to catch innocents before they fall off a cliff in a field of rye. That's my dream job. It's
such a weird thing to say.
You can't. That's not a job, Holden. What are you going to do?
Talking about, man?
It's and so you kind of understand. He's very sensitive to innocence, and he has this kind of dreamy ideal as to what he wants to do with his life, but that doesn't translate into other human minds. And I feel the same way about Johnny. He does have this kind of ideal. He wants to rebel. He wants to express to the world that he's just unhappy with everything, but he doesn't have the verbal intelligence to really express that. We have to sort of judge him through his actions, and he gets so frustrated at his inability to communicate that he's also a criminal, and he does some really horrible things. So we can understand him. We understand his appeal, even though we may not like him, and we definitely don't approve of his actions.
Here's my thing with The Wild One. The Wild One is historically significant. I think it sort of characterized an idea of coolness that would linger for a bit and would come to define a certain era of coolness. I think that it is a great lead performance from Marlon Brando in particular. I also don't like it very much. I'm not a big fan of this movie. Well. I appreciate its qualities. I understand its significance, but I was watching this and I had never seen this one before. It just hadn't come up.
It had been many years, but
it just hadn't come up, and I'd always meant to get around to it, and I'm glad it finally did. And I'm watching this, and I even texted you, and I was like, so the point is they're all jerks? Because that's the thing. It's just a wandering gang of jerks. And then they go around and they're jerks, and then Johnny reveals he's got a little bit more substance to him, but then we find out he's still a jerk, and then jerk things happen, and then it's over. Like, there's almost no plot to it. Cool as Ice has more plot than this. Cool as Ice actually has a better constructed story, but if you look at the bullet points,
it's a stupid, contrived story, but there is a story.
The whole point is, a gang comes into a town they would never normally be in. There's a reason why they have to stay, and the Wild One, a guy like sprains his ankle or something, and they have to wait for a bit. In Cool as Ice, their motorcycle breaks down. Shit happens, okay? So they're stuck there, and their presence there leads to conflict. The difference is that in Cool as Ice, it then escalates somewhere. And here in Wild One, people get riled up a bit, but it never, like, punches through and, like, has, like, this big...
Somebody dies. What are you talking about?
But it's not like... It doesn't feel... like the torches and pitchforks came out. You know, it doesn't feel like it escalated crazily. It feels like it's just a shitty thing that happened.
But here's the thing: the adults understood what had happened. They saw that it was an accident, and they even asked, "Whose fault was it?" Well, it wasn't really anybody's fault. They actually acknowledged that right away,
I appreciate
and they
that.
offer to let Johnny off the hook.
Yes,
and he says, "No, I can't do business with you people. I hate you. I hate everything you represent. I'm not on your hook. I don't care about your hook."
I agree that his character is fascinating. I think that's the thing that makes the movie still resonate today as well as it does. But I also just think it's so... A lot of the movie just feels non-committal when it comes to the actual events that take place. It's really riding hard on Brando's charisma and Brando's ability to bring out this character even when not much is happening. It's interesting. It's unusual that the suburban community would actually, like, cut him slack. Doesn't make it, like, dramatically compelling. It's actually, like, a somewhat easygoing, unremarkable narrative with a really remarkable character in the center of it, and I think that's interesting, but it doesn't really grab me.
I totally disagree when you say it's easygoing. I think this is a kind of hard-edged movie.
I don't. Maybe it was. It doesn't feel that way now.
I feel like that if you've read On the Road, this kind of harkens to what Kerouac was also saying about just leave it behind, and their ability to just sort of be on the road and be jerks is incredibly freeing, even to a modern audience.
But I don't like them. They're just boisterous and annoying. I can appreciate that they're fighting an oppressive system, but I don't want to hang out with them.
There's a part of you that has that sort of fantasy. I want to tear this mother down.
But not with those guys. I don't like those guys. I would hate those guys. I would, like, quietly just leave the room whenever they showed up. So I just have no interest in them at all as people.
You'd be the regular suburban dude in
I don't think I'd
movies.
be oppressive about it. I just would find their loud, abrasive personalities annoying. I can appreciate the ethos, which is why I like getting to actually know Johnny better. Because he's inarticulate about it, but he's got stuff going on under the surface. Well, everyone else he's with, no.
I imagine if, given their own circumstance, or if they had their own, like, diner waitresses that they could make goo-goo eyes at, then maybe we would get to know them a little better. We'd get to see some of them open up. Wouldn't it be great if there was, like, a parallel story with Lee Marvin's character?
Lee Marvin I do like in this movie. I will say that. We don't see nearly enough of him. He's an interesting character because he shows up and he's got this big rivalry with Johnny and wants to fight him. He also repeatedly says he loves him. Like, he's an oddly constructed character where he's a fan.
They used to be part of the same gang, and they split apart, and they still respect each other, and they respect that they can fight each other. So
I kind of liked him, but
they're flinging fists at one another, and that's kind of their form of bonding. And I think that is really well captured. And Lee Marvin, because he's having so much fun doing it, really lets us feel that.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm saying that from my perspective, Marlon Brando's performance is iconic for a reason, and it needs to be explored. But I think maybe the movie isn't as dramatically fascinating as it was in its time when it really was iconoclastic, which brings me to my overall point about both movies.
Yeah.
I think both movies were either trying to create something cool or trying to catch cool in a bottle, like a stroke of lightning. And I think as a result, both of them feel instantly dated.
Well,
they have to. When you're trying to be on the cutting edge, you fall off immediately afterwards.
I don't think the Wild One was trying to be on the cutting edge. It just had the luck of being on the cutting edge. It just hit that chord. I don't think the filmmakers got together and said, let's invent cool, because that wasn't really a thing yet. Like
Maybe not.
cool was a jazz term, but it wasn't really being bandied about in the mainstream.
They knew Brando was sexy. They knew what they were doing. There maybe wasn't a word for it. Use it today.
There wasn't. That sort of cool ethos was still being invented.
It's interesting that
and I think it still reads to a modern audience because we understand that they're sort of fighting off this oppressive system. That stupid introduction notwithstanding.
But I think almost the cartoonish element of Cool as Ice maybe sells that almost a little better than The Wild One. Because, no, I'm not saying it's a better movie. I'm just saying it pushes it. It pushes the difference so hard between the two various cultures. That it's actually a little bit more engaging, whereas The Wild One just feels like, a retro period piece, and Villain Ice feels like it came from its own universe and will always be secure, like the bottle city at Candor. It's always going to be there, very tightly sealed off from the rest of reality.
Speaking of which, I kind of, after Cool as Ice, Vanilla Ice kind of fell off. He wasn't able to get another hit. He got hard into drugs for a while. He did that stupid reggae period. And then he made himself clean. He had some kids. His life is back on track now. And good for him. I have nothing against Vanilla Ice the man. I just think he sucks as a rapper. I don't want to buy his records. But I'm wondering if he had taken sort of like a Pee Wee Herman approach, or Elvira, or Mr. T.
He'd embraced his weirdness.
Yeah, and just sort of kept that same outfit over the decades and the same hairdo, and still insisted that he was the coolest guy in the world and turned himself into a cartoon persona.
He could Hasselhoff that shit if he had wanted to.
Yeah, I think he would. Mr. T's still working, right?
Well, I haven't seen him in a while, but he was still doing his shtick for a long ass time.
And Elvira's still doing her shtick. I think
Hasselhoff is the perfect example where he knows he's a bit of a cartoon and he's embraced it, and people love him for it.
I think if he played into his image and he did the Vanilla Ice super cool Bransford, Missouri stage show, he'd still be making a lot of money. And
we see this a lot.
A lot healthier career.
We see this a lot with people who get typecast. Whether they get typecast in a certain role or they get typecast as a certain persona. It's got to be frustrating as an artist, even just as a human being, to just be people always expect the same thing of you, and that there's more to you than that.
Especially if you're this young 19, 20-year-old guy who's being told how to dress by a studio, and you're trying to be a serious musician.
But career-wise, leaning into it usually works better than not.
Yeah.
And occasionally you can break out and completely reinvent yourself, but the people who lean into it and just embrace it and just say, and I'm Elvira now.
Uh-huh.
She's doing great. Everyone loves her. She's awesome. It's a somewhat straightforward career in a lot of ways, but by God, she's wonderful at it. Cool as Ice and The Wild One are both in their own way kind of odd historical relics about generations dying, whereas in The Wild One it was about a new generation beginning. Cool as Ice, it's about an old generation ending, so we can get past this and get to something that's really cool again. I think Cool as Ice is obviously an intentional homage, quasi-remake to The Wild One. They bring out a lot of interesting tropes in each other, and if you haven't seen either, they're worth it. Cool as Ice is so fucking weird, it needs to be seen.
I saw it as a midnight show. It had already reached midnight status.
That was how I first saw it as well.
Did you see it on Valentine's Day at the New Art?
I did.
We were in the same theater. Yes, we hadn't met yet at that point, but we were in the same theater.
It was beautiful.
I had asked a girl to come with me, and she said no, so I went by myself.
It was not meant to be.
Nope, it was not meant to be.
So that is it. That is it for Critically Acclaimed this week. Next week, we'll be back with new releases like Sicario, Day of the Soldado. We will also be reviewing, because it's the last week of the month, we will be reviewing an entire movie franchise, and this month you selected in the poll all of the Legally Blonde movies. So that'll be fun. It's a bit of a hoot. I actually haven't seen the last two, so this will be fun. But for our poll for next month, we're doing something a little different and something people suggested, and we thought it'd be fun to try out. Usually we do a whole movie franchise, and we're never going to stop doing that, but we thought maybe we'd switch it up once in a while. And so next time, we're going to do the entire filmography of famous filmmakers.
Filmmakers that you get to choose.
Absolutely. We're going to narrow it down to 3, and you're going to tell us which one you want us to look at in its entirety. And the filmmakers you get to choose from for the episode that will air at the end of July are Tim Burton, noted stylist, director of Batman and Alice in Wonderland,
and you know what?
Ed Wood.
What's today?
June 23rd.
We're recording on June 23rd. That's the anniversary of the 1989 Batman.
Damn right. Nicely done. You can also pick from the Coen brothers, one of the more weirdly varied American filmmakers of the last 50 years. Comedy, thrillers, genre benders, very unusual storytellers.
Mostly comic noir. That's
their niche.
That's where they revisit most frequently.
Yeah. And finally, just to throw in a classic one, your other option is Stanley Kubrick, the director of 2001: A Space Odyssey and The Shining and A Clockwork Orange. Recently, his film 2001 was re-released in theaters. I missed that restoration screening, but I've seen it in theaters before, and it's fantastic.
I've seen it on 70mm, in fact, in theaters. So,
fancy.
Even though it wasn't even shot on 70, it was blown up.
So we're fans of all of those filmmakers to varying degrees, and we feel very confident that we should be able to have a really interesting conversation about those filmmakers. So pick the filmmaker you want us to discuss, and we'll discuss every feature film they've done. Every single one. And
no, the Coens and Tim Burton are both still working, so it's only up until the present.
It'll get cut off, but we'll review their new movies as they come out. So anyway, that'll be a real hoot, and I can't wait to see which filmmaker you picked. And if you like that, we'll do more next time, because we have plenty of filmmakers we would love to delve into in detail. But in the meantime, we do have time for some letters.
Okay.
The email address is letters@criticallyacclaimed.net. Send us your questions, your critiques, your corrections if we screwed something up. Let us know. And Whitney, who have we got on deck first?
This one comes from Belle.
Hi,
Hello, Belle. Dear Bibbs and Whitney, first of all, I'd like to thank you for getting me to see The Untouchables, a film I had been meaning to watch but had just had to finally sit down and enjoy if I wanted to finish your podcast. I'm not the biggest fan of going into a film with a lot of knowledge as to what happens. It is a great film with a capital G, and undoubtedly has some perfectly crafted and edited moments, as well as one of my new favorite scores.
Okay.
My question for you today is about parallelism in filmographies. This is something that can be talked about pretty easily, but be it the similar themes of a father trying to gain a daughter's approval in Aaron Sorkin's work, something that works brilliantly in Steve Jobs and not so well in Molly's Game, or the visual style of any film director, Guillermo del Toro with his color palette, Alfonso Cuarón with his incredibly extended handheld shots. But I think the most interesting example for me is the work of Damien Chazelle. Whiplash and La La Land are the same film with the same messages: obsession, relationships versus dreams, and some of the same scenes, a monologue about jazz.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It wouldn't be that interesting to me, except for the former one is one of the most intense dramas I've ever seen. And the latter is a light musical, which, even though I know isn't perfect, I saw La La Land at a moment when I needed a serious pickup, and it remains the film I've seen the most times in a theater, once with live music, and one of my top 5 of all time.
Wow.
What is a great double feature or triple feature from a single director I could watch, where it is essentially the same amazing movie, but each one is a wildly different genre with a different tone. Thanks for enduring the overly long letter, Belle. I can think of one off the top of my head.
Okay.
David Lynch's Lost Highway and David Lynch's Mulholland Drive.
There you go. That's great.
Watch those two back to back.
It's a great example.
And it's not just because they're both named after streets. They are both very much films about shifting identity. And very literally in the case of Lost Highway, a little bit more metaphorically in the case of Mulholland Drive. But how about you can, thanks to your environment, it's difficult to really put into words, but thanks to your environment or who you are or your character or your guilt or your emotional state, can essentially become another person. And in David Lynch's case, it's quite literal. I feel like Lost Highway is the very male version of that. There's a lot of violence in it. There's a lot of dark pornography and all these gangsters and crime. It's all very phallic, violent male concerns.
Yeah.
Whereas Mulholland Drive is the female half of that story, where we get to see sort of a lot more brightness, and I don't want to say sensitivity, but
here's what I'll say about it. I think Lost Highway is very much about how Bill Pullman, who halfway through the film transforms into Balthazar Getty for never mind the reason, they both don't understand Patricia Arquette.
Yeah.
She's this mysterious figure, whether she's a femme fatale or a victim. It's hard to say.
It's played kind of like a noir, but it's like noir in a nightmare.
But it's this mysterious, dreamlike noir. And yet one of them is from the male perspective and they don't understand the women. And the other one is from the female perspective and they do understand each other and it's still just as dark and compelling.
Yeah.
That's
an excellent point.
Yeah. I had one. I had one. Now it's gone. But a lot of filmmakers have made similar films and explored similar themes over the course of a variety of different genres. Spielberg has focused on the idea of daddy issues over and over and over again. And what you can look at is like early in his career, he was very suspicious of fathers. A lot. You look at Close Encounters. It's basically a story of how a dad justifies leaving his family to pursue his dreams. And then Hook later on would tell a story about a guy who
learns
stayed
how
with
to be
his
a good
learns
father,
how to incorporate fantasy and family together. And that's sort of rigmarole is something that sort of revolves around a lot of his various materials. Woody Allen made films about love triangles over and over and over again from different perspectives.
Love triangles. Let's just say it. Cheating men. His films are not about love triangles. His films are about infidelity. That's what's going on with Woody Allen.
You're not wrong. You're absolutely not wrong. Some filmmakers have literally remade their own movies to various effects. Hitchcock. Basically, in addition to just recycling the Man on a Run story over and over again in films like The 39 Steps and Saboteur and North by Northwest, he literally remade The Man Who Knew Too Much, one of which was bigger and more family-friendly and had Doris Day singing a song in it, and the other one's a little darker and creepier. It starred Peter Lorre. But you can see, though, the way that Hitchcock sort of invented the Man on the Run genre as we know it in The 39 Steps, and the way that he sort of completely subverted it in North by Northwest. In the 39 Steps, it's basically just this world
kind of straight up. Yeah.
Well, it's this world you think you're fine in this world. You think you understand everything, but no. And in fact, a lot of people who seem like the nicest people in the world are hiding sinister secrets. There's conspiracy and political intrigue at the heart of even the most common interactions. And really, you should be very unsettled by it, and the world is a very dangerous place. North by Northwest is basically about how all the government stuff is really stupid. And a guy gets caught up in it entirely by accident, and in fact, he's caught up in an intrigue that doesn't exist. North by Northwest is about a plot that doesn't happen. It's fascinating. He's completely changing the entire paradigm that he kind of invented. And that's a kind of a fun one as well.
I like going over any filmmaker who works for like many, many decades and comparing the films they make near the end of their careers as opposed to ones they make the beginning. So if you're to watch like Kurosawa's Stray Dog.
I was just about to bring up Kurosawa.
Which is about a young cop who loses his gun and has to go on a really, really hot day in the city and just has to go on this mad quest to get his gun back, and that's the nickname for a lost gun, is a stray dog. And then you compare it to something like Redbeard, which he made like in the 60s. And Redbeard isn't even late in his career. He made films as late as the early 90s, but you can see that he's maturing, and you can see especially Toshiro Mifune, who plays Redbeard and the cop, starts out as this kind of really panicked hothead who just can't concentrate on anything. And then you compare it to the character he played in Redbeard, who is a wise old man, who is the one who's giving advice to the young hothead all of a sudden. And I like seeing that sort of evolution, how he calmed and gained wisdom and became more sensitive as a filmmaker as he went on. And I was actually encouraged to relate to different parts of his own stories. So I think that's a good double feature, kind of that serve as counterpoint to one another. Anyway, let's read another letter.
All right, here's one from James. Hello, Whitney and Bibbs. I've considered myself a cinephile for coming up on 5 years now, and am currently in film school. But I still seem to be missing out on a lot of classic films. I think a large part of that is that the home viewing experience and how many is the home viewing experience and how many distractions there are compared to a theater. My question to you two is: are there any tips you have for watching movies at home to replicate the theater experience, and are there any great classics you feel are overlooked in favor of more popular films? So those are very different questions. So let's focus on the first one. When you're in a movie theater, the whole idea of the movie theater experience is twofold. One, you're experiencing the same piece of art with a whole group of people.
Yeah.
And that can entirely change a movie. Like, you can watch a thriller at home and go, oh, it's okay. But then you watch it in a room of people getting into it and getting really excited, and you realize it's really effective in a different environment. So, but there's not much you can do with that. You can't bring 100 people into your apartment. It's hard to do. But the other thing movie theaters do is that they isolate you. It's a dark room, nothing to the right of you.
You are a captive audience.
Nothing to the right of you, nothing to the left. You're not supposed to leave. If you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom, but you don't want to crawl over people, so you're encouraged to stay and look at nothing but this movie. That's it. And the movie is on a screen big enough that it fills your frame of vision, so there's nothing distracting you. So what you want is not to be distracted. So my biggest piece of advice, if you really want to absorb a movie, turn off your phone.
Just turn it off and put it in another room and put it in a drawer.
Yep. Don't doodle. Don't just sit down with the movie if you can. Shit happens. You know, the dog will wet the carpet or something and you're screwed, but like, you can't control that. You control as much as you can. So you try to keep yourself from being distracted. And I do it too. I watch TV. If it's something I'm not super invested in, I'll check my email or tweet. But like, if I'm watching a movie and I have to review it, I'm trying to stay focused. And that can be difficult when you're at home, when you have a lot more freedom. You can move around, you can pause it. The goal is just to sit down, watch the movie all in one sitting without getting distracted. So turn off the lights if that helps. I recommend that. But basically, turn off your phone.
Yeah, that's kind of it, really.
Yeah. What about great classics you feel are often overlooked? Because
there's lists like this written all the time about great movies that are overlooked.
Because the thing is that classics sometimes fade over time.
That's true.
And movies that were, like The Wild One, for example, it's well known, but not watched all the time. When was the last time you saw a screening of it advertised somewhere? It's not often.
It comes to the Cinematheque every couple of years.
Yeah, but it's not common. It's not as widely viewed as it used to be. That happens. So what are some classic movies that do not get talked about as much as they used to that you want to make sure people still sit down and watch?
Like legit.
Well, you think they would. I'll give you one. Mrs. Miniver. It won Best Picture, won Best Actress at the Academy Awards. It was considered one of the greatest pieces of wartime propaganda, in a good way, because it helped show American audiences what was going on in England during the Blitz. And it basically encouraged a lot of American audiences to say, oh, we really need to make sure we fight the Nazis. Because there was a lot of talk at the time of, let's not get involved. It's also a fantastic movie in its own right. And it's a story about a very normal, very upper-class British family who are simply trying to keep their shit together when every night they have to go downstairs into their basement and hope a bomb doesn't fall on their heads. And it's really tense, and it's really scary, and it doesn't go everywhere you expect it to go, and the performances are amazing, and it's wonderful. It's really, really great drama in every way, and it's one of my favorite movies.
Well, if we're going to go with like early Best Picture winners, I feel like not a lot of people have seen All Quiet on the Western Front any longer. That was like, I think it only won the third Best Picture. It was
third or fourth, yeah.
Third or fourth best. It was like 31 or 32. And it is one of the single most damning anti-war films you'll ever see. And it has some pretty indelible imagery about sort of how the idealism of going off to fight the war and doing your country good by being a soldier very, very quickly mutates into just a cavalcade of death.
Yeah.
And there's one of the most indelible scenes is... and near the beginning, we see the soldiers sort of marching off to war, and they're all like looking over their shoulders. They're marching away from the camera, and each of them sort of looks over their shoulders, and we see these fresh-faced young youths, and they're marching off, and they're kind of hopeful, a little bit scared. And then we have the adventure of the movie. The characters go out into the battlefield. They all die miserably. Some of them come back, and they're all just damaged by war. Like, one of them wanders into his old classroom, and the teacher says, hey, here he is. He's a soldier. Tell us about your experience. And he turns to the classroom and says, it's all shit, kids. Life sucks. Being a soldier is horrible. Don't listen to this jackass.
Yeah.
And then it ends with that same shot of the soldiers marching away from the camera, and they look over their shoulders, and then it fades into a field of graves. They're just marching into death. It is such a beautiful damnation of war in a forthright way that we don't really get out of war pictures anymore.
Well, again, we still use war, the threat of war, the promise of war.
As a drama device.
Well, it's not as a dramatic device, as a political device. This is a just war. This is a war we shouldn't get involved in, even though it's got the same reason to get involved in it as this other war we said was great. We do this all the time. We justify some wars, we condemn other wars, we say this violence is okay, this violence is not, and really anyone who goes to a truly violent war, not like maybe a short skirmish, maybe they'll emerge okay, but like a harrowing wartime experience, a lengthy war. Everyone who comes back says that fucking sucked and no one should ever do that. That is the worst thing anyone could ever possibly do, and we should never do that again. And we need to listen to them. I'm going to lighten it up a bit. There's a filmmaker I love, and I think I talked about him on the show before, but his work is almost uniformly brilliant, and a lot of younger film fans don't see his films as much anymore, and that's Preston Sturges.
Yeah.
We talked about The Lady Eve, actually, in a few episodes ago. One of the wittiest and strangest writers and filmmakers. He was one of the original auteur filmmakers in Hollywood. There was a time when directors usually didn't write their own material. There were, like Orson Welles started that off. Preston Sturges started that off. Preston Sturges told very intelligent, high concept, character driven comedies that put most of modern comedies to shame. And you can kind of just throw a dart and pick a good one. But I would recommend starting with either Sullivan's Travels or Hail the Conquering Hero or Palm Beach Story. Those are my personal favorites. But anyway, the list is long. Watch Turner Classic Movies.
Or if
that's a good one. They usually show stuff of interest.
Or Filmstruck, if you're into international cinema, you can check out whatever
Anything
the Criterion collection. Thanks to the Criterion collection, I know about Kaneto Shindo. It was one of the students of Mizoguchi during sort of the what's known as the Japanese New Wave, and he did a really great movie called The Naked Island, which is brilliant because the characters don't speak. It's about peasants who live on an island and about just sort of how tenuous their lives really are.
I recently, for an article I wrote for IGN, in which I talked about the other Lucasfilms, like the films that they made that weren't Star Wars and weren't Indiana Jones, and they made a lot of interesting films, many of which are
ambitious at the least.
Ambitious, like even the ones that like you can argue. I love the sequel to American Graffiti. I think more American Graffiti is in many ways a more interesting and better film than American Graffiti, but a film that I think is a bona fide classic that I'd never seen, and I wish it got a bigger boost. And I think it's on Criterion still. It's called Mishima: A Life in Four Chapters.
The Paul Schrader film. Yeah.
Easily the best thing Paul Schrader has ever directed. Like, it's astounding.
It's certainly his biggest movie. It's his most visually interesting movie.
I love it. Yeah. Love it.
I'm fond of autofocus, but...
Okay. Fair enough.
They're not really comparable.
Let's read one more letter.
All right. Here is a letter from Brendan. Hello, Brendan.
Hi.
Dear Bibbs and Whitney, recently I was thinking about the career path of Tim Burton, mostly because I accidentally watched his Alice in Wonderland and thought it was terrible.
Sorry about that.
It is. I was wondering how someone who is on such a run in the 80s and 90s hasn't made a great film since Mars Attacks. And even some people would argue that. I think he has made some good films since then, but nothing compares to his early output, and he's also made some truly dreadful films like his Alice in Wonderland and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. My theory about his output's downturn has to do with his use of CG. Especially in Alice in Wonderland, CG allows him to show way too much of the world to the point where the film becomes visual overload. Compare that to his Batman with its use of practical effects, and that implies more than it shows with these tall Gothic buildings that seem to go up forever. It allows the audience to use their imagination more to fill in the gaps. It's also something to be said about CG making everything look too slick, while practical effects give everything a more tactile, coarser look, which I think benefits the style more. Anyway, why do you think a new Tim Burton film coming out is not as exciting as it used to be, and do you agree with my theory?
A couple of things with that. First off, I would argue that Tim Burton has made some good movies in the last, since Mars Attacks, and at least one great one, because Big Eyes is fantastic.
Big Eyes is really, really good.
No one talks about it, and it is fantastic.
It was one of those films that would have been Oscar-worthy had it not come out, like, right in the middle of a glut of Oscar films that year. It was released, like, I think on Christmas Day, along with, like, 8 other films.
Yeah, it totally got steamrolled, and it's incredible, and I would argue it's maybe Amy Adams' best performance, and that's saying
And I love Christoph Waltz, too.
He's really good in it. Yeah. He's doing what Christoph Waltz does, which brings me around to my point, actually, about Tim Burton. Tim Burton, when he first came out as a filmmaker, and we'll talk about this in great detail, people vote for Tim Burton for the whole director's filmography episode. Tim Burton is Tim Burton. And when we first met him in films like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, and Batman, there was no one like him. he had influences. There were things we were familiar with, like German Expressionism and Hammer horror, but there really was a distinctive vibe to every single thing he did. And what we realize over time, as you get obsessed with Tim Burton, and he has such a particular way of looking at the world and a particular way of processing art and then repackaging it into something that feels new. As his career went on, you realize that's what he does.
He has that one note.
And you can get used to that. And frankly, it's not always equally applied in every situation. He really reworked The Legend of Sleepy Hollow into something that was distinct and different. He didn't do that with Alice in Wonderland. There are some interesting ideas in there. They get bungled in favor of the spectacle.
Yeah, you say he hasn't done a good film since Mars Attacks. I would argue Sleepy Hollow is quite good.
That was after Mars Attacks. I think Sleepy Hollow is fantastic.
Sleepy Hollow is it's scary, too. It's his first, proper frightening film.
My only problem with Sleepy Hollow is I think once you... we might talk about this next month, but I feel like once they explain the ending, it's unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to be as complicated.
You're not a Van Garrett, you're a Van Tassel.
Don't care!
Who cares? Just
doesn't need to be this complicated. You can scale it back.
More monster tree.
Yeah.
I want more monsters.
But that's going... Sweeney Todd is a good movie.
I like his Sweeney Todd.
It's kind of straightforward. It's what you expect it to be, but it's good.
And you and I think, are the only people in the world who defend Dark Shadows.
Dark Shadows is really good if you like soap operas.
If you're familiar with soap operas and you can appreciate the stilted drama and still also kind of laugh at it, it's a hilarious film.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't see it that way.
No, fair enough.
I think it looks fantastic.
I've defended some of his other films too.
And hello, Big Fish. Big Fish
is beloved. Yeah. It's a real tearjerker.
Tim Burton has said himself in interviews that he doesn't know the difference between a good and a bad script, so all he's going to do is he's going to grab the script that a studio hands him and he's going to apply the master aesthetic.
I don't think he's necessarily going to hand the script to studio's hands him, but he's going to send one that he thinks he could bring a fun aesthetic to.
Yeah, so he's
a stylist.
He's a stylist more than he's a character guy, so if he has a good script, he's going to make a good movie.
Generally speaking.
If he doesn't, he's not, and Alice in Wonderland is a sucky script.
It's not a good script.
You notice that he doesn't write his own material. It's always the work of other screenwriters.
The closest we came was he wrote the original, I think, poem that Nightmare Before Christmas is based on.
Yeah, but he didn't write the screenplay to that.
No, he didn't. I'm just saying, he obviously had a lot to do with that from the creation of the project.
And he's not even the director on that film.
No, he's not. In fact, when he finally did direct a stop-motion animated movie... Corpse Bride is not very good.
You don't like Corpse Bride?
I don't like that one.
I like Corpse Bride.
We might talk about that in more detail next time.
I think it's kind of almost a platonic ideal of a Tim Burton movie.
Tim Burton is an interesting filmmaker, I think, for our generation in particular, because, again, he was a very particular filmmaker. He was a very distinctive filmmaker, and there was nothing else like him. So if you liked that aesthetic, he was your guy, and you would watch anything he did for many, many years. And
that sort of, pop fairy tale goth, if you can call it anything.
And there were a lot of things that came out. There were a lot of things that sort of he brought to the foreground. A lot of storytellers that would become more famous after he made that stuff popular. I would argue that the Addams Family movies that Barry Sonnenfeld gave us, we probably wouldn't have had those if Tim Burton's aesthetic
hadn't already made Beetlejuice.
It would not have been made that way. I don't think it would have been made. I don't think it would have been allowed to be as dark as they were. Because you look at even the original 1960s show. It's very silly. It's very light.
Whereas in the 90s movie, they're murdering Christmas carolers right at the outset.
They're beheading each other. It's really fun. And I don't think that would have existed without Tim Burton. But yeah, we have an affinity for him because there was nothing like him. But,
as you got used to him, it was less striking.
Tim Burton
tried to evolve with the times. Good for him. He changed his aesthetic a little bit from film to film.
In the 2000s in particular.
Yeah, and a lot of people said, oh, you're falling off. He's not falling off. He's just changing. And
this is one of those things that I think people, and film critics and film writers in particular, sometimes fall victim to, which is we kind of lose interest in artists who don't change with the times. As though that somehow invalidates them. And then what almost inevitably happens is then they die, and then we give them credit for having this whole body of work that really felt like it was of a piece. I'm trying to make a concerted effort to keep an eye on that. Even someone like Terrence Malick, and you can argue that his later movies aren't as good as his earlier movies. he's doing the same thing. He's exploring the same themes.
Well, and even he is doing something where he's like commenting on the modern world, and song to song. He's like, well, I haven't been to these concerts, but they seem like a really great emotional landscape to explore. Yeah. And we see sort of him trying to bring, at the very least, his sensibility to something more modern.
What we're really going to have when all is said and done and he retires forever, or when he someday passes away, we're going to have Terrence Malick's perspective on a whole bunch of things, and that will be useful. That will be artistically interesting. And we're going to have Tim Burton's perspective on all of these, all of these artists, all of these works of art, all of these stories from throughout history, and we're going to have this very distinctive stylist's perspective on all of them. Some of them were successful, some of them were not, but it's all going to be really interesting. And if you complain about him now and say, oh, he's not as good as he used to be, someday we're not going to have him anymore, and we're only going to remember him fondly because he tried every time.
That said, I'm dreading Dumbo.
Oh,
it looks so bad.
It's such a weird thing, man.
We're going to do live action remakes of all of our films. Great. Which ones? Well, Dumbo. Wait, why?
Dumbo? What was that? Is that the one you run to?
So, but you'll have to animate the elephant anyway. It's like the Jungle Book. We're just going to do it with new animation. It's like, that's an almost all animated film. The Jungle Book.
With 101 Dalmatians, but anyway. Moving on. So that is it. That is it for Critically Acclaimed. If you want to write us, it's letters@criticallyacclaimed.net. Send in your questions, you want suggestions for anything, you want to know how things work, you have any Schmoedown related stuff, anything at all. Again, don't forget, we are on the latest episode of the Schmoedown, so check it out if you haven't already. Check out our writings at criticallyacclaimed.net, which has links to our work from across the internet and also new original pieces from both myself and Whitney Seibold.
That's right.
If you want to assign me or Whitney Seibold an article to write, you can do so through our Patreon page. Patreon.com/canceled too soon. That's canceled with one L.
That's our other podcast, Canceled Too
It is.
Soon.
We started the Patreon there, but we're starting to incorporate them a little bit. And for the $10 a month tier, you can get one article from both myself and Whitney Seibold. It's 2 articles a year. And it can be about more or less anything you want. Some restrictions apply, but we'll talk to you if you run into any problems. Yeah. So head on over there. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at William Bibiani.
I'm at Whitney Seibold.
The website is at Critic Acclaim. Don't forget to check us out on Canceled Too Soon, where we review television series last only one season or less. We're just about to record an episode about Hey Vern, It's Ernest, the Ernest P. Worrell Kids Show, which is really something.
Yeah, it's hard. It was hard.
And we will be back next week with reviews of all the Legally Blonde movies and Sicario, Day of the Soldado. So don't forget to go to the Schmoeville Facebook page to vote for the feature filmmaker filmography you want us to review in its entirety next month. And am I forgetting anything? It feels like that's a lot.
No, you got it.
Oh,
I think you covered it all.
All right, thank you, everybody. Never forget everyone's a critic, okay?
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?